Good.
Yeah. Lucinda, I think. Lucinda.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are going to call the June 9th meeting of the Quincy Farm Committee to order. It is 8. We can't hear you. It is 8:19. Is that better? I don't know if I can do this.
If you get close to the microphone, it'll pick it up better.
Okay. Well, do it over. Thank you. We are ready to call the June 9th meeting of the Quincy Farm Committee to order. It is 8:19. Emily, can we do a roll call of members, please?
Yes. Committee member Scott.
Present.
Vice Chair Vanderwerf.
Here.
Chair Green.
Here.
Committee member Sidlow.
Here.
Committee member Rockefeller.
Here.
Committee member Maniatis.
Here.
And committee member Bennis.
Here. Please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Before we get started, I'd like to do something very positive this morning and recognize one of our fellow members on the committee. Melinda Hamons, can you stand up, please? Melinda has served on the Quincy Farm Committee since 2015. She is an artist, and her knowledge and experience have informed planning for art education at the farm. Her memories of the farm and in path have provided an important connection to the history of this property as well. Her 5 years of volunteer service on the committee are an impressive commitment to Quincy Farm and its future. Melinda, we'd like to present you with this certificate of appreciation for your services to City Council and the residents of Cherry Hills Village. Thank you so much for your time and energy over the past 5 years. Join me in congratulating you. Before we get started today, I just want to make a few comments about this process and how it will work, and hopefully share some information with you about the committee and what we've been doing. So I want to thank you all for coming today. For those of you who are on Zoom and not here in person, we welcome you. I specifically want to thank Emily Black and Laura Gillespie for their help in expanding access to this meeting through technology. I believe thanks to their yeoman efforts, this is probably the most publicly accessible meeting in the history of Cherry Hills Village. Our objective at this meeting is to hear from you, the citizens and stakeholders, regarding this first draft of the first published version of the master plan. There are those of us on the volunteer committee and staff that have been working on this project for 5 years. It is good to see progress. And I'm grateful for the continuing dedication of this group. And I'm personally impressed by their thoughtfulness, visionary thinking, and their flexibility and creativity when managing multiple points of view. You will recall that this process has not been without its significant challenges through the past 5 years. Nevertheless, the goal remains to develop a project that not only honors Kat's legacy and vision and her extraordinary gift, but is also flexible enough to meet the needs of multiple citizens, community members, and stakeholders within the constraints of the conservation easement. We're grateful to those of you who have chosen to come speak today. More input is helpful. Please be specific and constructive in your comments. Due to the number of those who have asked to speak and the time we have allotted, we may or may not respond to your comments directly during the meeting. Rest assured that you will be heard, and we consider each of your input valuable to the process. In the future, please feel free to send emails to the city for inclusion in our information packet. This ensures that we all have timely information at the same time. On a final note, there is no final to this meeting. It appears there was some erroneous information circulated in the community. Our work is far from over. Many important portions of the draft master plan, including access, operations, and implementation, are still in process. Yet I think we would all agree we need to keep moving forward. On that note, are there any additional comments from our committee that you would like to share at this time? Hearing none, let's get started with the audience participation portion.
Come on up and great. So.
First on the list is Debbie Wells, and she has a presentation for us that she will be sharing on the slides. You should be able to see them up here, and they should be available to our Zoom participants. Each member of the community will have 10 minutes today to speak. The normal procedure is 5, but we're allowing you 10 this time.
Okay. Okay, so you're gonna hit share screen.
But I'm not ready.
You're not ready yet? Okay, can I have any quick comments? You can have this on here.
Good morning, can you hear me? Yes. Can you guys hear me easily? Okay, and if not, will somebody come around and just let me know that I'm not speaking close enough to the microphone, because the idea is to exchange information. So good morning, everybody, and my name is Debbie Wells. I live at 4950 Sanford Circle West. I want to thank Lucinda and Cosina, especially for asking me to come talk with you, share ideas and feedback regarding Quincy Farm. I'm excited to have an opportunity to show some slides that I put together in 2014 to show the Quincy Farm Visioning Committee, on which I served, with a number of volunteer Cherry Hills Village like yourselves. I got to know Kat when I was in elementary school. She was a mentor, teacher, and lifelong friend. I rode with her until I left the village for college. We stayed close over the years, and when I returned to Cherry Hills Village with my husband and elementary school kids, and Kat and I resumed our friendship, spending time over the holidays, Easter egg hunts in the West Field, the West property, and other family gatherings. About a decade ago, Kat started talking with me about her interest in putting Quincy Farm into a conservation easement. She knew I had been involved in helping Cherry Hills Village think through how to preserve what is unique and special in our village. And it's so interesting because we're so close to Denver and we're such a gem. And we just thought that mattered, and Clausina and I were involved in it, and Harriet, and many, many others, and it was actually a lot of fun. But Kat wanted to meet Clausina and Harriet, who she knew were starting a Cherry Hill Land Preserve at the time. So the four of us met and talked about the preserve's vision and efforts that they had made to date. Kat was optimistic about the ability of the land preserve to have staying power and to raise funds. Kat felt both of these abilities would be necessary to have an effective conservation easement program in Cherry Hills Village. Not long thereafter, Kat began working in earnest with Sydney Shafroth Macy, who had grown up in Cherry Hills Village near the High Line. Sid grew up near the High Line, and Kat and Keith knew her parents, and Kat was very aware of Sydney's expertise, dedication, and work in the land conservation community in Colorado. Sydney is the Senior Vice President at the Conservation Fund and has also worked for the Nature Conservancy. She is with us today by Zoom and will share her thoughts a bit later in this meeting. But before jumping into the slides, it's important for you to know that Sydney has dedicated more than 40 years to conservation. She has a no-nonsense, results-oriented approach, and she's left an indelible mark on Colorado and the West over the course of her career. She has completed well over 100 individual conservation transactions that have protected hundreds of thousands of acres, including Quincy Farm. Sydney's job was to carefully understand what Kat wanted her to do with her property and then help Kat take the necessary steps to make it happen. So she was involved really from the very beginning of Kat's thinking about this process and met with her extensively on the property. Sydney, thank you very much for being willing to join us this morning. The slides that I have to show you guys today are from two farms in Lincoln, Massachusetts. And Lincoln is a suburb 20 miles west of Boston with many similarities to Cherry Hills Village. It's semi-rural, beautiful trees, it's well established, and there are lots of beautiful trails. So I'm going to now share my screen. Well, we're not ready to have that particular one. This one just needs to be front and center without the other stuff.
Okay, just map that on your screen.
Okay, so here we are at Codman Community Farms in Lincoln, Massachusetts. And Codman is owned by the town of Lincoln, and it's not adjacent to it. So when you come to Codman Farm, it's a very simple signage and very welcoming, the old buildings, and very down home. And I was just delighted to encounter this. You can buy eggs. They have turkeys at Christmas and Thanksgiving. You can buy honey that's been grown on the farm, collected. And again, there's a community notice board. And one of the intents of this property is to pull in the community and help people get to know each other in a meaningful way. And there's inclusion of kids very specifically. It's also a working farm, which is different from what Kat's is. But it's interesting to note that they've taken the old buildings and worked with them in a way that's interesting to the community. I particularly love this. Pick your own garden, and if you look carefully, the scissors to the right are on a hook, and you take a pair of scissors and cut a couple of stems, and you pay 25 cents per stem. And again, it's very low key. And here's the community garden, and here's how they attempt to pull people in and help them enjoy the opportunity that is in front of them. Informal notices, low cost effort. And so now we're going to move to another facility, still in Lincoln, but it's slightly different. I mean, it was acquired by the Audubon, and it's been very carefully curated. We go in, railings similar to cats. People come on a bicycle. They park here, got some lighting, got some control, so people are separated from the cars and pedestrians. Children come and enjoy it. And they have sort of a farmer's market-like area as you come in, where you can purchase vegetables that were grown on the site and enjoy the harvest. It's a membership organization. I don't believe any of these items were necessarily grown on site, but they know that their membership will enjoy them. So one of the things that this site, the Audubon tries to do on this site, is to teach people about natural systems. And so these solar panels are both a display and a working function of the farm. And again, they've got some interpretive about the photovoltaic panels, kind of how they work. And then they commissioned, or I think the guy might have been, I'm not sure if he was a volunteer or what, but he made this incredible sculpture that only flies when the sun is shining. And it's quite large, and you look up at it, and it's just kind of a marvel. And then there's a building that has room for children, little camps. It's also a wonderful community gathering space. And then you go into the gardens, and there's lots of room for people of all ages. Little kids in a raised bed. She's sketching. We've got a kitchen garden. That looks like Ross Stewart, but it's not. Vegetables, chickens, playground. And again, very simple. It's not souped up. Kids that can make a mess. They have a modern nature center that it was very carefully designed to be energy efficient. Teachers love it. Kids get into books for all ages. Water recycling, composting. They teach about recycling. Benches, which are partly fundraisers. Fencing for the visually impaired. And then very low cost, simple fencing that can be moved depending upon the need of the time. If they need to plow this, not plow, but if they need to cut this field, they can remove the pegs and carefully put them back. And similarly, if they have to plow snow, they can do the same thing. They really thought of everything, the birds. And so they also have a lot of programming, fun things for people to do at the farm. So they've got chickens, botanical illustration, photography, 4-H, sustainable gardening, how to move from season to season. They have low-key activities at night. I'm going to take just a little bit more time, I'll go faster. Halloween, canning, newsletter. Now we're leaving this particular farm, going to the next one. So I wanted to pull out a couple of pictures of Huber Woods. And Kat was a Huber. She grew up on this property. Her family donated it to her county. And just a couple of pictures. These were taken by Cherry Hills Village resident, Judy Armstrong, who got to know Kat because she taught her how to use a computer. And when Judy, who lived in New Jersey, visited Huber Woods, she took some pictures and gave them to Kat in a nice book. Different seasons, how it looks, how it feels, low-key signs, helpful signs, painting, an environmental center, accommodation for handicap, more painting, puppets, children, reptiles, gatherings. Beautiful views, and horses. I'd like to make a few closing remarks because you've asked for some suggestions for Quincy Farms. My main suggestion is that as you develop this program, it needs to be iteratively established. The site plan needs to be iteratively established with the programming you want to accommodate. And of course, the programming, as Lucinda describes, needs to be variable over time because we don't know what kids or grown-ups or anybody is going to want to do 10 years from now, or even 5 years from now, and maybe not even 5 months from now. But my feeling is that until you know what you want to achieve on this particular property, to put things in hardscape is probably limiting what you can do in the future. And why would you do that now before you understood how to accommodate this stuff? The other thing that these slides show is that you don't have to spend a lot of money. You can take what you've got and you can work very effectively with it. Fill it out, have the community enjoy it, see what works, see what doesn't, learn from it and change and evolve over time. Security. I am very concerned about this site right now. I live very close. I'm very aware of how many people are on the High Line. That's a real liability and we need to address it. And we really need to address it right now. We can't wait until the master plan is over and done with. There are some very active steps that need to be accomplished now. And one of them, I know that the village has worked hard to have the police officers drive through. As a child growing up in Cherry Hills Village, I could ditch police officers in a heartbeat by jumping into the bushes and like skedaddle. And I know plenty of children that are able to do that. It's going to be a hot, dry summer and kids don't have enough to do right now. And we need to be very sanguine about that. That's an idea that's very different than 3 months ago. And 3 months ago, if we thought we didn't need security, the situation right now is markedly different. Those buildings are potentially in jeopardy and that's an issue. The other thing is that there's some opportunities hiding in plain sight. As I mentioned, children need more to do this summer. Why not have some programming this summer? And I know there's some thinking about that. But chicken coop building, offer a follow-on course on raising chickens, conclude with a lesson on how to cook an egg. Teach kids takes a fresh egg home. Who's eaten a fresh egg recently? It's divine. You could also, if kids or families don't want chickens, you could have them build a recycling bin for, you've got trees and grass that grows in your lawn, you're going to need to compost it. And so kids could do composting and they could take it home, and if their parents don't want to do it, they could teach their family, how to do that. And that would be kind of a meaningful thing to do for children. Painting classes, quartets on the lawn for fundraisers, if that's allowed, and I'm not sure that it is. Tai Chi, yoga, stretching, croquet on the lawn, and you bring your own mat, mallet, and ball. The possibilities are endless. You could charge a small amount. You could find a volunteer instructor, and we could be off and running, and the grandparents could do Tai Chi while the children are learning how to build compost boxes. Something for everybody. Stakeholder involvement. There are lots of people in Cherry Hills Village who care about conservation easements all over Colorado. Stewardship of Quincy Farm is broader than than Cherry Hills Village. And we need to be mindful of that. We need a success, and I think we can get one. Lots of people are watching and waiting to see how this process evolves. They want to help, they want to be involved. They need to know about it. And I know a lot of effort has been made to reach out, but if you only get 2 or 3 people at a public meeting, or you get 2 or 3 people at a but the demonstration that you had at the village to describe sort of some of the thinking, probably you're not using the right email list. And you need to redouble your efforts and call your neighbors and say, come. And that word of mouth, Cherry Hills is what, 6 miles square? We know each other. And let's not be wooden about the outreach attempt. Let's be personal about it. In any event, I appreciate the opportunity to share this with you. Thank you for letting me have the time.
Debbie, let me ask you a question. You mentioned twice, or maybe once in the slides and once in person, there's a membership component to this.
Can you just
Oh,
clear
yeah.
your mic?
Thank you.
Thanks.
There's a membership component to this. Could you elaborate then? How does a membership in these two farms work, or one or two farms?
I visited those sites 8 years ago. I didn't get into that, but we know that these models exist, and a call to their executive director, I think would be very meaningful. And a membership to any organization starts with being familiar with the goals and probably some of the delights. And a delight, one of the reasons to have programming, and we saw it so clearly last year when there was a stargazing opportunity, and Kent Denver donated their time and their equipment to let people look into the skies, and it was marvelous. People had blankets on the ground, and they brought their children, and the Quincy Farm Committee, not the Quincy Farm Committee, Cherry Hills Land Preserve offered hot chocolate and cookies, and it was very friendly, very community building. And probably if you'd solicited those people the next day, they would have given a donation. So that's why I'm suggesting programming this summer that's delightful, low-key, and the idea is to get people in touch with what's happening, to get a mailing list, to get a following. Does that help?
It doesn't explain the membership. That they were using that format. What is the membership? Instead of throwing it open to we'll say the village or something,
Oh, got
a
it.
specific event, how do you get it? What's the benefits and the cost of being a member?
Okay, I'm gonna talk off the top of my head. The benefits of being a member could be, you would receive a regular newsletter that talked about the programming. You would get a discount on your Tai Chi class because you were a member. But if I'm not a member, I could come anyway. I might just pay a $1 less or $1 more. But the idea would be friend raising, to involve people, to tell them about the opportunities. But it's a really good question, and I'd be happy, Gordon, to help the committee reach out to the executive directors of organizations like these and others. And I also understand that there is a ranch in Sedalia that offers membership and programming and I know that the committee has looked at Star Ranch and some other models, but there is a model and we could learn about it and mimic it, the parts of it that we like. Any other questions?
Yes, I have a question. Sorry, I'm new at this. Can you hear me? Debbie, I wondered if you knew the acreage of those farms as compared to Quincy farms.
It's a really good question. I don't know the answer. We could find out.
Which one? Huber Woods, 300.
Huber Woods is 300 is what Natalie said. Okay, with that, the next speaker.
Thank you, Debbie. Our next speaker is Elizabeth Hamilton.
Hi, everybody. Good morning.
And if you could just please state your name and address for the record. Thank you.
My name is Elizabeth Hamilton, and I live in Parker at 12502 North First Street. And I'm going to start with reading on behalf of Lisa Carlson, who was ahead of me.
Elizabeth, could you move the microphone a little closer? Thank you.
Is that better?
Yeah,
Okay. I'm going to try to talk with the mask on, but I don't want to pass out either. So again, I'm going to read on behalf of Lisa Carlson to start. She was ahead of me growing up here in the village, and her horse currently lives at Quincy Farm. The conservationist Aldo Leopold said, "When we see land as a community to which we belong, we may begin to use it with love and respect." He called this a land ethic, which expanded the definition of community to include not only humans, but all of the other parts of the earth as well: soils, waters, plants, and animals, or what Leopold called quote, the land. He believed that direct contact with the natural world was crucial in shaping our ability to extend our ethics beyond our own self-interest. These lessons that Leopold so elegantly articulated in his essays are what generations of kids learned from Cat, Candy, and Quincy Farm. This is what they believed. This is what they taught. Quincy Farm provides a rare opportunity to teach generations of more kids about this land ethic by interacting with it. They should have real, not manufactured opportunities to interact with the land. Quincy Farm should be about Cherry Hill rural heritage and the deep sense of place and connection to the land. It should be about the cycle of life. It should be about the role of water. It should be about where our food comes from. It should be about the importance of recycling and composting. It should be about creating a sustainable future for humans to live and thrive. While Quincy Farm has always had horses, a livery is no longer viable. I get that, but the essence and soul of the farm needs to evolve to a different model without losing its land ethic that Cat taught. This ethic lives at the heart of the conservation easement. Quincy Farm needs to remain real, not a themed playground. Real animals need to live here, not sculptures of animals. The experiences should be authentic, really feeding the chickens, feeding the goats, and yes, climbing on an occasional haystack because it is there for the animals. There is a unique opportunity here to have a sustainable farm that would be an amazing asset to Cherry Hills. We need to preserve what we have because once it's gone forever.
Could you possibly, yeah, we're having a hard time hearing you, sorry.
Is that better?
Keep going.
You gotta
Can you guys
stand,
hear me?
you gotta stand really close to that thing.
Okay.
Otherwise, just pretend you're one of these singers that object when they hold the microphone right in front of their mouth so you can't see the singer.
I know.
I can-
Almost what you have
I've
to do.
turned your audio up a little bit
Okay.
too, so you should.
Sorry, that is. Okay, so I'm going to speak, oh, that is louder, on my behalf and just give you a little background and quickly go through a few things that I think are important. Again, my name is Elizabeth Driscoll and I was raised in Cherry Hills. I've been part of Quincy Farm since I was 12. Kat is like a grandmother to me and I've had a 30-year friendship with Candy Ray. My horses have lived at Quincy Farm since 2001. I am here today because I know that there would be some disappointment between Kat and Candy with the plans that I've seen for the property, especially on the east side. There are hundreds of kids that Kat and Candy have shaped over the years with the fortune of this property, teaching and learning to care and ride horses. Hands-on, how to be responsible, kind, and community-oriented just by being part of this farm. I know it's hard when so many have interpreted what Kat wanted for this land and for the people who are lucky enough to know it. The two things that we all know and that is not up for interpretation is keeping the barn and the Hawkins house, which Jerry now lives in. So we ask, what is the goal and what is the vision? Is this a location for school field trips? Is this intended to be a rental location for events? When I see event parking in the dressage arena, I assume that is what you're intending. The cart has been put before the horse. Kat believed in the rural heritage of Cherry Hills Village. I know that the property will change, but maintaining this beautiful portion of Cherry Hills should look much different than it does on your current plan. How about talking about what you can enhance and making it better rather than cement pathways and an ornamental cherry orchard? We are supposed to be maintaining the historic and agricultural character of the farm. Funding. How is this project funded? The buildings are in sad shape and will be unrepairable without extensive work starting today. This, by the way, was not Candy's job. This is allocated in the budget. The resource of someone like Candy that was rarely utilized was incredible to watch. She knew every nook and cranny of this place, and I can count on one hand how much was actually asked and implemented. Taking Kat's garden apart that she and Keith loved was such a waste of, again, resources that could have been used otherwise to better the property. How about painting or just repairing some fencing? What vision are you going to tell the people for fundraising? You're going to have a hard time raising money for this when it's hard to explain just what the vision is and who you are expecting to be here. There are a lot of villagers that would be so happy to give to such an incredible property if you could explain the goal. I encourage you to think about the end of this month when there would be no activity on the east side of the property. Talk about liability without having someone on the property that feared. Talk about liability with having no one on the property on that side. It appears to be a big liability for Cherry Hills. With the east side of the property, I ask you, again, who are you doing this for? Busing in kids from the city or having kids and families from the village come? I understand that you guys are in the, starts of thinking about that, but having events and hands-on learning are what Kat really, not having events and hands-on learning is really what Kat wanted, not a water feature or a gas fire pit. It's hands-on caring for animals, compost, and things of the like. I know that still up in the air whether you guys are gonna have animals there, but it seems like the areas that you would have horses or animals or goats have been designated for parking. The bridge that comes into that parking lot now, if anybody's ridden a horse on the canal, that is a really line spot to ride across there. So I encourage you guys to look at that. And I, obviously Kat would love the kids to play and, have some interaction with, something like the hayloft. I'm not sure that's the right thing. If anyone's been up there, that slick floor is hugely dangerous. Take note of the door that drops down 2 stories and then move forward to finalize this as a children's play. Excuse me. I ask again, who is coming? Whose children will be playing in the hayloft? With no animals, not sure this makes sense. This is a beautiful property and is truly a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for Cherry Hills Village. We all understand that the only constant in life is change. I think what we are all asking for is truly what is the vision. We need strong, cohesive leadership in all the groups to keep Kat's wishes at the forefront. Let's see, I have faith that the intention will be there to honor this property in the future, but there has to be a better plan. Without an endowment, there is even more reason to create the vision. Thank you so much for letting me speak.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you.
Thanks for your input. It aligns with some of the things I've been saying about this farm and what's really important to try the story to tell about this property. There's plenty of these properties throughout Colorado and even throughout the United States, but the unique one about this one is its interaction with horses. And you really touched on that, and I think that's a very important piece of it. Does this master plan address that? It could do a better job on it, but I was thinking about it, and maybe there's an opportunity to try and figure out a way to program something that was so important to this property. And I keep hearing it over and over and over about the Pony Club. And the Pony Club is central to what you're talking about. It's impacted so many lives in very good, positive ways. And I keep hearing this over and over. So maybe there's a way to integrate that into the program. That was very generous of CAP to do that for so many years, for so many different people. And I don't know if the city has the ability, wants to take on that kind of liability. I don't pretend to know all that. But I think that's a really important piece. And I've been trying to voice my opinion about that because I've been involved in a lot of historic work in some of these agricultural properties. And that's what I recognize that's unique about Quincy Farm. Your comment about the hay play up in the loft of the large barn, I really don't think that's going to be viable because going through the structural assessment of that building, the structural engineer wants to put in additional framing members. That's going to make it hard to move around with that. You know, right, it's certainly dangerous already, and so I really don't think that's gonna be something that's gonna happen. You're not gonna have kids up there, or even really people up there, doing anything other than what it was intended to do. As far as the buildings being in disrepair on the east side, I've experienced a lot of different structures over the years. These buildings aren't in terrible shape. They are gonna need a lot of work, especially if you're gonna have the public in and out of them because of building code. So they're good buildings, they're hanging in there, and they can last a lot longer. They've got a good roof on it and decent foundation. So those are gonna keep the buildings alive for a long time. And so as I go through all of this stuff, I'm trying to work on an estimate of restoring all of these buildings or putting them back together per the historic structures assessment. And as I've been looking at them, they're not that bad. So I really appreciate your input because it really starts to drive home this whole notion of how important Quincy Farm is to the community and what it's done in the years, and that the master plan should take that forward. So thank you.
Thank you.
Any other comments?
Well,
I'm sorry, can you, what we need to have you do is sign in, and we're going through the list. Did you sign in ahead of time?
We can't hear you.
If you want to come up to the microphone.
But she needs to sign. Kathy, can you sign in for us?
Oh.
And
I don't know about the meetings. I'm one of those people. I'm so sorry.
there you go.
She's already on the list, it's showing us on virtual.
Oh, okay.
Oh, we thought you were gonna, yeah.
Yeah, I apologize. I thought you were going to participate in the virtual meeting. I have you on that list.
Oh, you guys, I'm really sorry about this. Whew. My name's Kathy Conroy. I was Kathy Moore. I have been familiar with the village since 1955 and lived here, watched the development.
Kath, we can't hear you.
Oh,
Can you take the mask off? Lower it.
Well, she can, there we go. The microphone.
I'm really good at this, okay? So, thanks for letting me
it's
know.
new territory for all of us. Thank you for being so flexible.
Oh, my goodness. Okay, to repeat, I'm really bad at wearing a mask, as you can tell. This is one of the first times I have actually been out of my house. So obviously you can tell how important this is. All right, I started to say I've been in the village since 55, with a minor exception. And that is my husband and I moved back out of the village till about 9 years ago. But we're on the canal next to the village. First, I need to let you know that development is going to happen. Second of all, I know that controlled and planned development is fabulous. A parking lot, as I recall at Cat's memorial service, was talked about because there is important need for people to park safely off the city streets and be able to conduct themselves the way most people would want to, which is with respect and understanding. Okay, enough of that. Funny story, we talk about fire, we talk about vandalism. I was one of those kids who very innocently in the cow shed, we used to put on plays for the community. And yes, they had to pay, they had to have a subscription. These were 12-year-olds figuring out how to make things pay. Well, my brother accidentally set a fire. The building almost went up, the paddock definitely went up. And so I'm mentioning this because there was no adult present. That being said, the security factor is huge. And again, you know, it's a community building, So it's gotta be safe. And that has to be planned for. Before anything else, you wanna maintain what's there and make it safe for people to use it. That's all I wanna say about that, because I think we all need to know. You guys know that. The second thing you need to know is I was one of those kids who worked for the place. I gardened, I weeded, I painted, and to be honest with you, it's the only place I learned to do that. My family didn't do that. And I don't honestly know where else I would have learned. And it's been with me my entire life. And I have a hunch everybody's had experiences like that. But with the development that goes on, I don't know what type of opportunity young kids have anymore for that kind of thing. For just being a kid without their soccer practice, without their music, and all the scheduled things. Do they really have the time to get dirty? This might be a good place for that. And again, it has to do with planned development. And planned development, it is gonna happen. Things are gonna change. But I have a sense, and as I said, I just found out that you guys know how to do this. I've seen other properties in the area, the Hilliard property, the Duke property. And Ma Duke kind of started this whole thing about giving large tracts of land to a community for the purpose of whether it's open space, learning, whatever. I've seen this happen in other small communities where CAT was actually the catalyst for this, along with Ma Duke. And it's not just here, you guys, it's in other states. And for her influence to reach that far is pretty amazing. But that's also who she was. She also liked her scotch. But there's a great opportunity with the controlled planning to have something fabulous happen. And I don't just mean for kids. How about those romantic walks? And I did see a couple get engaged there. But why not keep it? But do it with a plan. Okay, I'm done. And again, thanks you guys. I really didn't know about this meeting at all until I got a phone call. All right, bye.
Thank you,
Do you guys have questions for me? Whether historical, whatever.
If they bubble up, we'll be happy to reach out to you and figure it out. As I said, we're taking everybody's input into consideration today, and the committee will have to work through and consider all of this. So we sure will reach out for clarification unless anyone has any questions at the moment. I just have a comment. Thanks for being here. And I think that people of our generation, Kathy, remember what it was like to be a kid, and you made the vacant lot your own property and played, king of the mountain, etc. But I think that playing and getting your hands dirty really is one of the things we've been talking about having for kids on this property. And for obvious reasons, there does have to be some supervision. I mean, we loved it that we were not supervised, but for obvious reasons. So anyway, thanks for your comment.
My big thing is plan development. Because it will happen. And I know you guys are working hard, so congrats to you. And thanks. Okay? And again, questions, I am available. All right, bye.
Great, thank you.
Sorry. I had thought that Eric Jamich was going to speak. I thought Eric Jamich was going to speak.
He's next.
He's on the list.
We kind of went out of order, unfortunately. Thanks, Rebecca. Next on the list, Eric.
Good morning. My name is Eric Jamich. I live at 8 Blackmore Road. Must I keep this on? I may have to get off.
Can't hear you.
If you speak close to the microphone, we
Yeah,
should be
we
able
have
to
the
hear
links
you.
up there for that purpose.
Okay. Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. Briefly for the audience, I just wanted to go over the purpose and the terms of the conservation easement. discuss why I believe that the current plan contravenes those terms. And then I'd like to ask you to listen to the words of Kat Anderson for a minute to consider whether this plan honors the intent of the generous gift.
I think it's fine if you want to take that off while you speak. Is everyone okay with that?
I don't care anymore.
Please.
Briefly for the audience, I'd like to go over the purpose and the terms of the conservation easement, discuss why I believe that the current plan contravenes those terms. And then I'd like to ask you to listen to the words of Kat Anderson for 1 minute, consider whether this plan honors the intent of the generous gift that she made. A conservation easement is a voluntary legal agreement that permanently limits uses of the land in order to protect its conservation values. It's not a park. The conservation values of a qualified conservation contribution may be for one or more of the following: to preserve land for outdoor recreation, or by education of the general public, to protect relatively natural habitat of fish, wildlife, or plants, to preserve open space, and to preserve historically important land or structures. The Quincy Farm does all those things. To that end, the property must contribute something that makes it special. The easement document references quote, property contains wetlands, riparian areas, a pond, and natural areas that provide food, shelter, breeding ground, and migration corridors for several wildlife species. The property serves as natural habitat for several bird species, including waterfowl, shorebirds, hawks, and neotropical migrants. The habitat on the property is also significant, as required by the Treasury regulations, as it represents wildlife habitat in an urban area. It's also open space. The property qualifies as open space because it will be preserved for the scenic enjoyment of the general public and will yield a significant public benefit. It should be noted that the easement also states, the terms of the easement do not permit a degree of intrusion or future development that would interfere with the essential scenic quality of the land. Some of us think that picnic tables and an outdoor classroom interfere with that scenic quality, but I don't know of anyone that thinks that a 40-car parking lot improves the scenic qualities of the area. The document then goes on to discuss uses. I'm just going to look at the preservation uses and the recreation uses. Quote, preservation uses. The parties intend that the property remain in its substantially open condition with trees, grassed areas, gardens, and a pond, and that only permitted structures described here be constructed or maintained on the property. The property and the structures permitted thereon may be used as a nature preserve for historic preservation and interpretation, for gardens, for private and public meetings, gatherings, and celebrations, for classes and education, for photography, painting, and other artistic endeavors, and such other uses as help to preserve the property and instill an appreciation and respect for the natural and human history of the vicinity. Then it mentions the recreation uses. Quote, low-impact recreation uses such as bird watching, hiking, horseback riding, and cross-country skiing are permitted on the property. Public use of the canal area is permitted subject to the terms of the Denver water easement. Bicycling is permitted only on the canal area of the property. So the uses are relatively specific. They're supposed to be low impact, presumably to both the land and the habitat. No bicycles, but tractor pulls and fire pits. I don't see how that works. And finally, there's the matter of public access. Again, reading from the document. Public access is permitted on the Highline Canal Trail in the canal area subject to the rules and regulations established in the Denver water easement. Nothing contained herein shall construe as affording public access to the remainder of the property. Although the guarantor may permit public access to the property on such terms and conditions as it deems appropriate, provided provided that such access is not inconsistent with the preservation and protection of the conservation values of the property. It seems quite clear that access is absolutely secondary to the conservation values, which to me makes parking a very secondary value. The current plan envisions parking that bisects the east parcel with approximately 40 spaces. To what end? Abutting the Highland Canal. I doubt that Mrs. Anderson gifted this land to become the largest parking lot and trailhead of the Highland Canal. And I know you've considered this. I listened to the other meeting, but it's still going to be the largest parking lot right on the canal, and you haven't discussed how you're going to control that. The December 2019 plan had 28 parking spaces. There was some public comment that this was too many. The March 2020 plan has 41 spaces. What are the activities that are planned for more than 40 cars? Are they consistent with the conservation values? Is the parking area consistent with the conservation values? Have you considered the impact on birds, other wildlife, traffic, and the neighborhood as a whole? Ken envisions a smaller amount of parking away from the Highland Canal and off-site parking with shuttles if need be. Wouldn't that be more in keeping with the intent here? But please, I want you to listen to Kat and judge her intent.
I think it's the oldest remaining Cherry Hills village. The whole idea of putting a conservation easement on the property was that it would stay the same. They can take stuff down, but they can't put stuff up. They can't take the front house down, and they can't take this barn down, but they can take my house down, but they can't put something up. No castles. You can see the view, you can see the trees, you have little green grass, and they can take everything out and let it go wild, but they can't put in a soccer field or tennis court or basketball hoops or anything like that. It's supposed to be open space. I would like children to come out here and learn about nature. And if they want to go up to the pond and catch frogs or pollywogs or something like that, that's, something that kids should do. And the amazing thing that we found about this place up here, the barn area, is when kids come here, they make forts in the bushes just like my kids, like the Stewart's kids, like everybody who's ever been here, they all play the same games. And I don't think kids get a chance to invent their own kind of game like that so much anymore. But I think it's great.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
We're having a really hard time hearing people, and that's really unfortunate. Maybe an audience check would be helpful as somebody goes on.
Okay, we'll check at the beginning of every presentation. We are working through a number of different technologies and a number of different platforms and applications. So we ask you to bear with us in those challenges as well so that we can make sure that everybody has equal access to the information.
Lucinda?
Yes.
Well, hi, this is Dino. Is it possible while someone is talking, is it possible to mute the other microphones? Because on my end, we're picking up a lot of ambient noise.
Great suggestion.
Thank you.
Dino, this is Emily. Unfortunately, Laura and I have to have ours on to be able to record the session and be streaming it also. So I apologize. We're trying to move as little as possible, but we're also trying to run the meeting. So
No worries.
we'll try and stay away from them as much as we can.
No, I thank you. No worries. I appreciate it.
Okay, next up, Dan Tully.
Good morning. My name is Dan Tully, and my wife Diane and I have a home at 10 Blackmore Road, which directly abuts the Quincy farm. We very much appreciate the committee allowing us to be here today, and we appreciate all the hard work and the time and effort that's been put in. The function of a committee is to gather different perspectives and viewpoints. It is human nature to want to avoid conflict And as a result, in an effort to accommodate as many ideas as possible, the final plan can be vastly different than the original intent. This mission creates complexities and complications. Every deviation has unintended consequences. I believe our safety is a victim of good intentioned overreach. We're fortunate to have a home in one of the finest communities in America that is protected by one of the best police forces in our country. We're thankful every day for the men and women of the Cherry Hills Village Police Department. Unfortunately, crime doesn't stop at our borders. Our neighbor was a recent victim of a break-in. The farm recently saw the unfortunate downside of homelessness. When a property looks abandoned, bad things happen. A car can drop off a home invader on Quincy, move through the farm, and in less than 30 seconds, our house and our neighbors' houses can be under attack. We need a caretaker's presence and a sophisticated security system. Fire, especially if animals are housed on the property, is another security concern. Whether it's an accident or caused by evil intent. I'm a firefighter, and I've seen firsthand the terror in an animal's eyes when threatened by fire. Someone needs to be there to protect the animals and structures. I've highlighted just two of the many security concerns we have. My wife and I would like to be part of the solution. Would love to see this to be a world-class resource for the community. To the extent we'd like to reach out to the extent that we can reach an agreement that works for us and our neighbors. Diane and I would like to donate $100,000 to Quincy Farms. Thank you.
Thank you.
I would like to say something. I am the neighbor who was burglarized.
You just hit the button once. There you go. And that's it. You got it.
I am the neighbor who was burglarized in October. Thanks, Rebecca. Any other questions, comments? Thank you for your very generous offer and donation.
Well, it's contingent upon working out something that works.
Yeah. And I think that is something that we probably ought to have a conversation offline. It is in my purview beyond the scope of this committee. Our charter is to deliver the master plan, not get into implementation issues, but we're happy to facilitate whatever conversations need to have with reference to those specific concerns. So having said that, point well taken, noted, and we'll make sure we follow up. Okay, next on the list, Gotsa.
I like that I go by one name now. My name is Gotsa Weiss. I live at 3951 South Hudson Way. I moved here years ago because of the rural character, beautiful mountain views and space that my family and I get to enjoy. I have been working with the Cherry Hills Land Preserve because I want to help preserve that unique character of our community, but today I'm here as a concerned resident. I'm here today because of my passion for my community and wanted to communicate my concerns with the current site plan, as I believe it does not express the brand that Cherry Hills Village represents, and that in its current iteration, we are not taking advantage of the gift that was left to the city. As a longstanding board member of the Village Club, I understand the costs that are associated with maintaining a property as big as this, and appreciate the challenges you face in producing a master plan that the community will enjoy and can afford. My question to you today is, what is your headline in 5 years? What is it that you want our community to be saying about what you have built? I think starting with that and then working back will give you a better vision for what should be done with the property. And as everyone had discussed previously, what is the vision? Right now, the site plan feels premature. Without understanding what your headline is, how do you know what to build or how to develop the property? I guess I don't understand your interpretation of Kat Anderson's vision for the site. I feel like much of this has been done without input from the community or city council, or worse, that you have received input and haven't been listening close enough. To me, the process has not been transparent nor timely. There's no clear process that has been outlined or followed or consistency that I can see. I also want to say, and believe most everyone here has said it today, that I believe there's considerable liability with not having a caregiver as a full-time resident on the property. We have tried to voice concerns around this, and while it hasn't been decided, has been said, I feel like you're simply using those words to pacify us and again, not listen. A property that sits empty will fall into a state of disrepair and invite outcomes that we will have to be accountable for as a community. And while I've heard some say that there is a liability of having someone live there, I don't see how that's even remotely true. At the Village Club, having someone there to lock up, make sure repairs are being done in a timely manner, and keep unwelcome guests off the property after hours has been a savior. As most of you know, the barn at the Village Club burned down years ago, and at the time there was no caregiver on the property 24/7. We lost 12 horses in that fire and the barn. I'm sure the community remembers this and when it happened. I realize right now there isn't a plan for live animals to be there full time, but regardless, vandalism happens. I personally would like to see the property be something more like a working farm. And as mentioned by Debbie, Drumlin Farms outside of Massachusetts is the same example that she's providing with other places in Massachusetts, where the community can experience and explore gardens and animals, visit pigs, sheep, goats, chickens, bees, horses, some examples, and learn how gardens are sustainably grown on site. Walk trails that explore the open space and natural habitat and their native wildlife. And at the time of day, without even having an event scheduled, that is limited. We have spent countless hours at Drumlin Farms where families can expose their children to a farm-like setting and just meander. We've spent countless hours there, and it's a place where my father-in-law volunteered daily as a retiree. We are at a critical point where you need to decide what it is first, rather than what it will look like first. I implore you to be more creative. Please do not let this property be a piece of land that is not understood nor visited, such as the Hardscape Park on the corner of Quincy and Holly, which I've never seen anyone enjoy. There's an old saying in the marketing community that's, there's never enough time or money to do it right, but there's always enough time and money to do it over. Please do not let that happen in this case. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Natalie?
Is it okay to take it off once we're? Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Hi everyone, I'm Natalie, I'm Kat's granddaughter. I live at 160 South Pennsylvania Street. I wanted to come here today and share my feedback from the plan, and feedback from our family as well. I really want to keep it positive today, but one thing that I did want to address, just as a preliminary issue that's of concern to me, my name and our family's name appears on page 5 of the master plan as participating stakeholders. And I'm concerned of that implied endorsement of this plan, which we haven't even had an opportunity to review. I'm also concerned that my comments appear in the plan without my consent. So I would just ask for the record that our name and my comments be removed until we can come to a consensus. And I also wanted to ask on behalf of Candy Gray that her name and comments be removed. I understand that we all make mistakes and there are missteps in this process, but things like that, and the fact that my family's name was spelled wrong throughout my comments really don't lend validity to the process and kind of trust in the process. So I just ask that we try and prevent those kind of, mistakes in the future. To do my part in enabling hopefully a more collaborative process, I'd like to offer you my reactions to the site plan and also offer into the record a document of feedback that I've collected from stakeholders that I think might be helpful. I know we only have 10 minutes today, but I think that it would be helpful for the committee to consider some of the questions that we've talked through. I've been thinking a lot lately about why Quincy Farm is such a special place and what it means to honor its history through my grandmother's gift.
Like many others, the lessons I learned from Kat and Keith during my time on the farm have stayed with me and guided me through life far beyond the ranch, as our family calls it. Just before my grandmother's passing, I had the opportunity to record an interview with her, to ask her about her life growing up, the things that she loved, and the values that guided her. When I think about what it means to honor her vision for the farm, I frequently think about that conversation. She talked about her joy upon discovering the proof that riding had therapeutic benefits, something she had known and shared in practice for years. She told me about how each year she would invite local students to the farm to retrieve cartons of multicolored eggs from the chicken coop. She would then have the students break open and examine a few of the eggs because even though they have different shells, they're all the same color on the inside. When I returned to Denver for law school, I discovered that the capstone field trip for my conservation easement law class was in fact a field trip to Quincy Farm. Those of us that were lucky enough to spend time at the farm learned lessons about leadership, stewardship, history, and life, not through signs and displays, but through authentic experiences. These experiences that generations have enjoyed on Quincy Farm cannot be manufactured or gleaned from a sign, or an empty chicken coop or a statue. Although the world has changed around Quincy Farm, it has remained largely untouched by time. Quincy Farm is at its core a farm. While I understand the role of animals on the farm has evolved, and something like Pony Club may no longer make sense, where possible, the agricultural, equestrian, and natural heritage of the property should continue to be honored in authentic and meaningful ways. Although horse hoofprints in concrete, hitching posts, temporary animal displays, and tractor pulls are a nod to the equestrian and agricultural history, I believe they'll fall far short of truly promoting an appreciation for the history and continued importance of conservation of land and animal stewardship. The chicken coop should continue to have chickens. The barn should house animals, even if they're not horses, and the gardens should be places where the community can grow their own food and learn about Colorado's native vegetation. The natural habitat of the farm should be preserved wherever possible. While our family believes that Kat would embrace trees, shrubs, and flowers, we also believe she would want them to be simple and natural. As to hardscaping, signage, and statues, less is more. The proposal of over 40 parking spaces is particularly troubling. We must be careful to prevent Quincy Farm from being treated like a trailhead for the Highland Canal. The riding loop as proposed shows riders entering through this parking lot and then riding around a very small area that will be trafficked by pedestrians and vehicles. This seems unsafe and undesirable for equestrians and something we should put more thought into. Our family looks forward to the future when this property will be shared with the community in an organized way, but hope you will take time to think carefully and engage with all stakeholders. Please consider all feedback and issues the community has voiced today, such as parking, security, and access, before moving forward with the current site plan.
Thank you, Natalie.
Can I submit this to you? Yeah, I can.
The chair is nodding her head yes. Susan?
My name is Susan McGuire. I live at 14 Mockingbird Lane. Haven't been before the committee recently. As of a few weeks ago, I left the land preserve, the Cherry Hills Land Preserve. It was a very peaceful transition, I'm happy to say, and we hired a new executive director. I want to thank everybody on the committee for allowing me to work with you over the last year and a half. I really have enjoyed it. And I appreciate all the support that you gave me in that role. And I think you'll really enjoy working with the new executive director, Kathy Bessler, who's here today. I've lived in the village for 20 years, so I did not have the benefit of growing up and knowing what Quincy Farm was like as a child. However, one of the things about the village that has always concerned me is that I've never felt like we had a place that was the heart of the village. We don't have a place where people naturally congregate outside of City Hall, where people come to for meetings like this for the most part. I view Quincy Farm as the opportunity to create a heart for the village of Cherry Hills that brings the community together, where people come to experience the beautiful views, the wildlife, the historical significance. So I'm very excited about what's happening here. Certainly, you're going to have a lot of different opinions about what it should be, and certainly it has to be managed with respect to the restrictions that Cat Anderson put in the conservation easement. However, I want to thank Design Concept because I'm thrilled that we have an initial draft of a master plan. I know it's been a lot of hard work with you all to get there, and it's a step forward in the right direction. Are there things that need to be managed? Certainly, that will happen in any situation like this. But I look forward to having Quincy Village or Quincy Farm open. So I want to thank you all for that because I know this has been a lot of work getting at least this far. I have a few comments that I'd like to make. One, I too am worried about the parking. I'm not going to speak to the number of spaces. I don't know how that was determined or why. My concern more is that in order to park, you have to drive through the middle of the eastern portion of the property where people will be congregating. And I worry that people will get hurt, there'll be accidents. It seems to me that the northeast paddock, which is closer to the street, could provide a parking area without requiring cars to drive through the middle of the farm. It's certainly visible from the street, which is not ideal, although perhaps there could be some kind of natural screen. It seems that it would be safer than having it all the way on the back side of the farm. Second, a use that I did not see in the master plan, but that I would like to suggest would be a conservation library that could be in either the Hopkins or the main house. I think this would support CAT's vision as laid out in the conservation goals in the easement. I particularly would like to have a children's room that had picture books for young children that had stories about natural wildlife, conservation objectives. I think that we could have a reading hour on a weekly basis, engage children in discussions of topics around the conservation goals. It would be a great way to get kids started early, thinking about what's important in terms of preserving the heritage that we have here. After hearing some of the comments this morning, it's possible that these things are going to be in the future draft of the master plan, but it concerned me that there was no operating framework discussion in the master plan. More than just programming, my question is, how will the farm be managed? Is it going to be more of a passive facility? There's interpretive signage. You can look into buildings, you can walk the orchards, or will it be more active, entering the buildings, exploring the barns, programming that we've talked about, materials in the nature center, open museum. Obviously, the more active it is, as opposed to passive, the more oversight and management we need. Will there be chickens, goats, and horses? Will we need an on-site caretaker? That's already been addressed, so I'm not going to go any further into that, but I think it needs to be considered. And then what about the limits? When will the farm be open, just for people to walk through? When will it be open for programming? When will the restrooms be open? When will the buildings be open? And what will the limits and rules be for accessing the west side of the property with its more limited nature? I also think the master plan needs to discuss the ongoing operating needs. Of course, as you move from passive to more active, it becomes more expensive. So I'm assuming an operating budget will be included in it. It was obviously not there. Finally, I think what would be very helpful for people as we look at the ongoing operating and budgeting needs is an analysis of different farms that are considered well run. How are they run? What are the best practices that can be taken away from that? Are they managed by the cities and the individuals in the city administration? Does the city retain a professional manager to do that? Is there a nonprofit that works with it, like the Land Preserve? Or probably on the further end of it, is there an overall nonprofit set up just for the support of that particular facility? I think that being able to look at an analysis of best practices of other similar types of properties would be very helpful for the city in understanding the best way to move forward with this. I really think that Quincy Farm can be the heart of the village, and I think it's a place that can bring us all out of our houses and meeting people that we wouldn't otherwise meet. I want to thank you all for everything you've done, and good luck.
Thank you, Susan. Next up, Julie Liggett.
Hi, everyone. I assume that's really loud now. Good. I'm going to break some of your rules, Lucinda. I wish I had some more practical suggestions. I am also concerned about the parking lot. As you know, my educational background is public administration. I currently work for a nearby Parks, Trails, and Recreation Department. We deal a lot with Highland Canal. I believe the closest trailhead to the south is the trailhead in Greenwood Village at Orchard, just slightly west of Colorado Boulevard, 30-some spaces. And then the next one to the north is a small one by Three Ponds Park. I think that's right, Lucinda.
Correct, and then there's on-site parking on Quincy, right? On-street parking, there's a couple pullouts, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so, right.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, Dahlia.
But as
So-
far as a true, I am concerned about it becoming a trailhead rather than a destination for which I think CAP intended it to be. And so I'm gonna just back up. My parents built their house in Cherry Hills about a year after CAP bought her property. For the old timers who grew up riding horses here, we started out lessons with Sue O'Connor at a riding club. And then if you were lucky enough to have your horses at home, you went on to Cat Anderson's Pony Club. I am trying to conceptualize, I guess, why some of the elements of the master plan don't resonate with me. And I agree about the horses part, but I don't think it's only the horses. I think it's the feeling that was created for those of us who spent our youth there. I lost two best friends in close succession. One to suicide, and Lisa McKenna, who a lot of you knew was in Pony Club, and she died of an asthma attack. And both of those times I walked a couple miles to Cat's place. And Candy was not a there kind of person, but she put me to work. So instead of crying, I went to the barn. And what's so essential about Cat's place is keeping that feeling of someplace that just has true meaning to people. And I don't think it has to be horses. It can be gardening or learning about nature or conservation, birds or butterflies, but to create a feeling of a place to go. And I'm sorry, I know those aren't specific suggestions. If I had to make a specific suggestion, I would say something like, not necessarily a community garden, because I think a lot of people in Cherry Hills have the room to garden, but perhaps a place for education, like xeriscape or low water, maybe a place for restaurants to grow food so that you could have, learn about sustainable agriculture, but also have a place where farm-to-table restaurants could. Lucinda's smiling because she knows that this is a thing of mine. And let me see, I don't think I really have anything. Oh, you're probably not super interested in this. This is a picture of my kid's senior picture at Quincy Farm. So it started when I was 6 years old, and I feel like we still, those of us who grew up there, still have a close connection. I would just love for future generations to be afforded the opportunity to have that connection with the word unique. It's used a lot, that there is truly, there's no other property along the canal, indeed in the Denver metro area, with opportunities that this presents. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. Comments from anyone? Okay, Jenny. Jenny Carpenter.
Thank you, Lucinda. Hi, everyone. My name is Janie Carpenter, and I am a resident at 9 Random Road. And I'm also president of the Cherry Hills Land Preserve Board right now. A local nonprofit with the Nature and Land Conservation Education Mission. And thank you, Susan, for providing a little update of where we are. I won't repeat that. I want to also thank you all for your efforts and time and energy on this very important project. We really appreciate it. I know it's been a long time coming together, and it's wonderful to see a draft on paper that we can provide feedback to. So number one, I will skip around because I don't want to repeat comments that people have made. One, but we really, the Land Preserve really hopes we can find a plan that preserves the magical qualities of Quincy Farm, as so many people have alluded to, the values of land stewardship and rural heritage, serenity, a sense of place and connection to land. In today's highly mobile world, one of the things that we have certainly seen as land preserves are hungry for that. They really value those opportunities, and they want to learn about local flora and fauna, local animals. There's so many new families here in the village that have not had the privilege of growing up here in Colorado, and it's part of our job is to help them appreciate it and understand it so they take care of it. We also really value the hands-on learning opportunities to learn about natural ecosystems, animals, science, and conservation in action. And agree with all those ideas. We also, like as Eric noted, the value of the natural preserve and the opportunities with the Nature Education Center, right? That is part of the way to create the heart of the community and live up to Kat's vision. We also want to comment that this property is unique and it is part of a constellation of parks that we have in the village. We hope that it will keep its unique nature and not and complement what we have in the investment we've made in John Park and other areas. And we really hope we can preserve what we have with that magic of Quincy Farm. Land Preserve would love to collaborate and provide feedback on the master plan. Similarly, as Natalie noted, we are listed as one of the collaborators, and we feel like that process is really just beginning. We really haven't had a chance to collaborate much yet, but we would love to. We would love to provide feedback and ideas, some engagement ideas. Some of those ideas, which I will share in detail offline in the interest of time, but a learning with opportunities about composting, the roles of pollinators, wildlife habitat, the animal barn, chickens, maybe the only animals is the easiest, but it does provide a hands-on opportunity. So we have a chicken coop in our backyard. We have so many kids who come to our house to see the chickens, to collect eggs, to see chickens hatch. It is a magical experience, and so many people don't have that opportunity to experience that. The other key thing is conserving land, the importance of water in the West, irrigation for farming, the power of snow melt. You can see the mountains from Quincy Farm. This is a fabulous education opportunity. And also, I just want to mention its value for the, somebody mentioned the stargazing event we had last summer. It was incredibly popular, but it also is such a unique place. It is one of the few dark places left in the village and in this side of Denver where people can see the stars totally differently than you can anywhere else. So how do we preserve that? We hope that we can provide, that in your efforts and working forward in this vision, we can build a low-cost plan that can stay flexible, that can listen and learn and evolve as we learn what works, and that we can innovate together to design something that really can be the heart of the village for our Susan's works. Collaboration opportunities in 2020. We would love to help, the Land Preserve would love to help build community support and engage people in the village or in around Quincy Farm and understand it. Last year, we were honored to hold some programs at Quincy Farm. We would love to do that again this summer to activate it, to get people to appreciate it and see it. Some of the programs we are already planning for this summer to hold for the Land Preserve or the Family Bird Walk, a painting and young at art exhibit, composting 101, designing birdhouses and gardens for birds. The stargazing we'd love to do again. Those are just some ideas of things that we'd love to do and engage that support, right? That's number one is programs. Two, we'd love to help if we can with engaging, exploring fundraising opportunities to realize the potential of Quincy Farm around the nature center, the pond, learning gardens, whatever they are. And we'd love to brainstorm on how to engage volunteers and help people feel a part of it. If people can feel a part of Quincy Farm, we believe that sense of place and that emotional connection is really important. And it comes back to that goal of what is your intended impact and for whom? What is the vision? How do you want people to feel when they're at Quincy Farm? That connection to land, that hands-on learning. Those of us who are fortunate to have chickens and those other horses and other opportunities. A lot of kids are growing up without that. And so this would be a chance to provide those opportunities for kids or families who don't have those larger properties in the village. Thank you.
Thank you, Janie. That concludes the written list. Do we have some folks on Zoom?
And Dory, we're trying to get Dory into the meeting, so
Okay.
to come back to her.
Okay, so Lucinda, if you wanna, we can invite Jerry Neff to speak. Let me get her set up.
Hi, Jerry.
Hi,
You're next.
everyone.
You're next on the list. Thanks for joining us.
What? What?
Were you interested in speaking during the audience participation portion?
I was listening, yes. I was muted, though.
But did you want to speak?
Yes, I do, please.
Okay, you're next up.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Jerry Norgren Neff, and I live in the Hopkins House on Quincy Farm and have for the past 21 years this summer. And I, like Natalie, had been interviewed by Shannon when the process first started, and was also unaware that my name was going to appear in a public document. And I, like Natalie and Candy, would wish my name removed as a stakeholder, and also have my comments on page 114 removed. Because, like I said, I was not made aware in the beginning. So, all right, that little housekeeping thing out of the way. On page 11 of the master plan, it states that the Quincy Farm mission is defined as enriching the lives of youth, adult, and families through conservation, educational opportunities, and the experience of a historic Colorado farm in a natural setting. It continues on to say the master plan document has been refined to meet these project goals, and one of the bullet points reads, maintain the historic and agricultural character of the farm. I feel that this has not been addressed at all, and don't feel that agricultural art of people planting seeds or irrigating, or of owls or horses speaks to the agricultural character of the farm or provides the experience. Why not have animals actually live in the barnyard as they have done for the past 100 plus years, not just trucked in for show and tell? Chickens in the hen house, goats or donkeys in the upper pens, horses riding in the arena, a large vegetable garden that children can actually plant, take care of, and harvest with a resident caretaker. How else will children learn about what it was like to live on a farm and where their food comes from? According to the National Register of Historic Places, quote, America's historic place embodies our unique spirit, character, and identity, representing important historical trends and events reflecting the lives of significant persons illustrating distinctive architectural, engineering, and artistic design achievement, and imparting information about America's past. Historic places tell compelling stories of the nation, states, and communities throughout the country. The National Register helps preserve these significant historic places by recognizing this irreplaceable heritage. Its primary goals are to foster a national preservation ethic, promote a greater appreciation of America's heritage, and increase and broaden the public's understanding and appreciation of historic places. Whether it is a simple cabin, a mansion, a battlefield, or a barn, human history is written all over the American landscape, revealing stories that enrich our understanding of the relationships between people in the land. When the history is tied to the land, as it is on Quincy Farm, it is important to make sure that the history continues for future generations and does not become lost. These are places that matter to all of us, and it is important to connect people to that sense of place. Old places are where our lives, memories, and stories began. They connect us to the past, anchor us to the present, and lead us into the future. Let's not lose our way as we think about the future of Quincy Farm. Serious thought needs to be given to the farm now as well as 10, 20, 100 years from now. What will it look like? How will it transition through the years? Will it still be a teaching experience of farm life and retain the spirit of the woman who so generously granted this gift? The farm itself is a rare example of a 1930s agricultural complex of a type that has all but disappeared from urban Arapahoe County and is now the last remaining one able to convey this early farming history of the area. When I think of farms in general, the words natural, sustainable, animals, beehives, crops, fields, farmers, produce, irrigation, and tools, among others, come to mind. I find this feeling lacking and not conveyed in the proposal for the east side. Farms existed for growing crops and raising animals, and was a way of life for hundreds of years, and those farmers were responsible for growing not only their food, but for an expanding America, and sadly this heritage is becoming lost. The majority of children growing up today have no idea where their food comes from, how a carrot grows, where an egg comes from, or how honey is made. This farm is such an incredible opportunity to teach children about the history of not only our state, but our nation and the importance farms played in it. Kat loved it when children came to the barnyard and explored, picked up bugs, built forts in the bushes, and generally learned about what the natural world was about. The pond is another element which plays an integral part in the farm's life. Such a great opportunity to teach children and adults about irrigation, wildlife, and the function of a large body of water to the ecosystem. That is why it is so disheartening to see the pond shrunk to almost half of its former self with a large over-engineered viewing stand. Why not actually walk through the grasses down to the water? If you ask anyone who frequents the ditch road, they will tell you that the stretch through the farm is one of their favorites, primarily because it is so wild, natural, and unspoiled. The pathway through Cat's Lawn is another example of something that doesn't need to be, and again being forced to walk here, not there. What happened to walking barefoot and feeling the grass between your toes, doing somersaults down the hill, looking for four-leaf clovers? Hard to do on a hardscape path. Why does the true nature of the farm have to be spoiled with so many added elements? A program entitled Teaching with Historic Places is an educational program of the National Register that uses places listed in the National Register to enhance traditional classroom instruction of not only history, but social studies, geography, and other subjects. Whether or not they can visit the site, students can investigate historic places near and far and discover how places all around not only their communities, but our nation reflect broad themes in American history and connect us to the past. Quincy Farm could be an ideal location for this type of remote or on-site study, if only it could retain many of its farm qualities. A quote from the master plan reads, "As the agricultural heritage of our region shrinks with suburban growth, preservation of historical landmarks such as the Quincy Farm provide wonderful and unique opportunities. Quincy Farm will be a place to educate future generations, embrace historical significance of the past, and integrate amenities with the surrounding open space connections. I feel that the plan totally paints over the heart of the farm, the beautiful barnyard. With so many parking spaces, an additional bridge, a path you are forced to walk on and share with horses, a fire pit, sculptures depicting farm life, moongate signage, and fencing galore, I find it hard to recognize what it once was, a working farm. I feel as if I have just entered an outdoor IKEA and am being told which way to walk and what to look at, never getting the chance to explore on my own. It is all too much and seems as if the plan is forcing the barnyard to be something it is not. A real working farm with a caretaker could teach so many people about farms and engage them in a way that an overabundance of signage, pathways, brick pavers, and artwork could never do, and for a fraction of the cost. The wonderful influence Kat had on so many young people who were part of her pony club is certainly not felt, and that part of the history seems to be pushed aside as well. The only nods to horses are a self-watering trough, some equine statuary, hitching posts, and a path to walk on. Instead of 38 parking spaces, why not dedicate a large portion of the arena for a schooling area where equestrians can practice or participate in lessons? On page 41 of the plan, it states that Quincy Farm is now managed by the city and under the conservation easement held by Colorado Open Lands. The property is also registered on the National Register of Historic Places. Both set forth management objectives for the farm that could at times be interpreted as contradictory. The National Register of Historic Places designates Quincy Farm as a designated district that includes architectural and agricultural significance. The designation does not mandate management requirements, but in order to be eligible for funding, the city would have to follow the Secretary of Interior's standards for the treatment of historic properties. For clarification, the property is not just listed on the National Register of Historic Places, but on the Colorado State Register of Historic Properties as well, and that should be included. The objectives laid out by both the conservation easement and the National Register in actuality, do not contradict, and that verbiage is misleading unless you detail the two documents item by item with explanations. While National Register listings are mostly symbolic, the recognition of significance provides some financial incentive to the owners. The National Register falls under the National Park Service, who guides the program. And although the NPS falls under the Secretary of the Interior, it is not the Secretary of Interior who determines the guidelines. Quincy Farm is designated twice on both the National and Colorado registers under two different criteria. It is misleading to state that the farm is designated as a district when that is only half of the listing. Both listings need to be noted. The bullet points under the heading Historic Designation need to be fully written out in their entirety, as they are misleading and easily misinterpreted. Also, all the page numbers referenced are incorrect. In at least one place, there was a reference to the Hopkins-Kadlachek house. That is not the name of the house on the listing and needs to be just the Hopkins house. It is extremely important that the history not be misconstrued and filled with inaccuracies, as those things will only be perpetuated if not corrected now. It seems that the village's mantra and new mission statement is one I have been hearing for the last few words in various forms. It is a city property. It needs to be open to the public, and we have already spent a lot of money on it, and it still isn't open. Sadly, that isn't a good vision for developing a good plan for the farm. So much of the history of our country has been lost to short-sighted ideas and concepts, only to be realized years later that history has been lost. The stewardship of our historic buildings and land falls to the people who will best honor, protect, preserve, and promote that history, not only of Quincy Farm, but of the incredible legacy that Kat Anderson left with us. Thank you.
Jerry, can you go back and repeat, when the timer went off, we missed some of your comments that you were, sorry, I hate to push rewind. Can you go back about 4 or 5 paragraphs, I think? It was.
Go back 4 or 5 paragraphs?
Yeah, it was the section about city property. And you cut out paragraph 2.
Okay, let's see. All right, just a sec.
Oh, yeah. Jerry, you're
Oh, yeah.
also, if you could send, if you have these comments written, if you could send them to us, especially so that we can get all the specific references to changes.
Yeah, it was where I started on page 41 that Quincy Farm is now managed by the city. Was that it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, and that's where the changes need to be made. There are a lot of incorrect things in that section.
Yeah, that'd be great if you could give us that.
Email that to me and I can distribute it to the committee and make sure that those the specific changes are made in the document.
Okay, great. All right.
Thank you, Jerry.
Thank you.
Yeah, appreciate it. Comments?
I have just a couple of comments I'd like to make. Jerry, this is Clisina. Hi.
Hi, Clisina.
Yeah, thank you for all of the historical information. I know that you and your mother worked on that as well, so I'm grateful for that. One of the things that the committee has been discovering as we've been working on this is that some of the things that we thought might be possible on this property, and in fact, some things that Kat herself thought would be possible on this property are not. And it's interesting because it has to do with Colorado Open Lands reading of the conservation easement. And one of the things, you know, when Kat was talking about kids being able to go down to the pond and hunt for polywogs, which was in they're doing, the pond is considered part of the west side of the property, which means that there's very little access to it. And so what you see is sort of the over constructed viewing platform, we saw as a place where people could actually look at what's going on the pond. And it may be that it is over constructed, but there does need to be a way for people to enjoy the pond, even though they cannot go and dip their hands in the water. So that's one thought. And the other thing that we also need to keep in mind is the property needs the east side especially needs to be handicap accessible. So some of the things that look like, what are we doing with gravel? Why don't we have dirt? Have to do with accommodating that. So just a couple of thoughts.
Okay.
Any others? Okay, who's next on the Zoom?
Sydney Macy is up next.
Okay, Sydney, welcome.
Hi, can you hear me? I'm gonna keep the video off, if that's all right.
Yes.
So my name is Sydney Shafroth Macy, and I actually live at 3367 Sunshine Canyon in Boulder, Colorado. But I think as many of you know, and as Debbie Wells mentioned, I grew up in Cherry Hills Village. I grew up on just south of where Kent is now, on the eastern edge of my grandparents' property, which was Cherry Hills Farm, before it became the current Cherry Hills Farm. When it was a real farm, my grandparents, I believe, bought that property in the late 20s or early 30s, and wonderful family stories of my family. My father riding his horse to school from the farm, sometimes into Grayland School when he was in elementary school there. So my family goes way back in Cherry Hills, and I was proud to be able to work on this project. As Debbie mentioned, my professional career was completely devoted to land conservation. I worked for the Nature Conservancy and mostly served as their Colorado State Director for a number of years, and eventually went to another group that was started by a former Conservancy president. That group is called the Conservation Fund, and that's who I was working with when I worked with Kat on the conservation easement. And just sort of a few sideline stories here. Kat and I actually really reconnected in the mid 90s when I was working on a conservation easement on a property in Douglas County called the JA Ranch. And that's the property she used to take her pony club to. And kids in the pony club were able to ride on the JA. That ranch is about 6,200 acres. It adjoins the Greenland Ranch in Douglas County, and like Greenland is also protected with a conservation easement. And I really think that the experience with JA and what we did there, and also obviously Kat's commitment to conservation on her family's property in New Jersey and elsewhere, really led her to get in touch with me to see if I was willing to work with her to preserve her property. We had some really really fun conversations throughout that whole process, which I think took a couple of years. She shared with me how my grandmother, Abby Stanton Shafroth, was the first one to welcome Kat to the neighborhood when she moved to Quincy Farm, having ridden her horse from Cherry Hills Farm over to Quincy Farm across what was just open fields at that time. And my favorite was stories about how our three-legged bloodhound Sam used to come in through their dog door and jump on the bed at night with Kat and Keith. So we I learned some things from Kat, and it was really a lot of fun and a real honor. And I was never a pony clubber, but I, like so many who have spoken today, grew up exploring the High Line and would occasionally find myself on Quincy Farm, sneaking into the barn and doing all sorts of mischief. And I'll never forget when Kat and I walked around the property and looked at all the buildings, walking into that barn and having, for the first time in my life ever, a real live deja vu experience. I mean, all these, you know, the light in that place, the smells, you know, I had been in there before, but I hadn't been in there probably for, 40 years. And it really took me back. And I think it was really a prescient moment. So my main message for you, because I think we were at it at this easement and the drafting of the documents for the gift to Cherry Hills Village for probably 2 years. I haven't actually really gone back and looked at all that, and I'm not sure I have access to that, but I spent a lot of time with Kat sitting at her dining room table, talking about this and talking about her goals and objectives, and clearly her commitment to this property and her vision for it. So what I'd offer, the main thing I want to make sure you hear from me and I leave you with is my willingness to be a resource for you, to help you in any way you want, to perhaps help convey what I recall and what I believe to be some of Kat's main goals and aspirations for this property. So with that, I have a few key points I'd like to make today. And again, then just say, if you want to reach out to me in any way or whatever is appropriate, I'd be happy to be a resource on this. My first thought on all this when I read I haven't read the complete plan, but I've scanned the whole thing. My first reaction is, I guess I would encourage all of you, and so many of the comments today have been so good and so on point, but to go slow on this. I know you've had the property for a while and lived with it, and there's a interest in getting the public out there and, quote, in my view, developing the property to some extent. But I would encourage you to try to go at this incrementally and go slow with whatever you decide to go forward with. My second point, as many have said, concerns the parking on the east side. And this is something I clearly remember. We spent a lot of time with Kat on this. Kat actually didn't want to allow any parking on the property. So there's no parking allowed on the west side. But her attorney and I really worked with her carefully to say that, some parking was going to have to be allowed on the east side. Part of her vision for this property was to, have kids come in and experience the land and have the public be able to enjoy it. While it's not in the easement, because Kat really didn't want to put it in the easement because she didn't want parking, but what we talked about was parking up in that northeast corner of the property. We talked about parking behind, I think, what's referred to as the stables and the baby barn in the site plan. And I, like others, are concerned about a road going through the parking, bisecting that piece of land. I'm concerned about 38 plus cars right on the edge of the High Line, which is probably certainly the center of the property and a key resource value that's stated and referred to many times in the document. I just think parking right next to the canal like that is really an intrusion on that resource. And I think my gut would be if you move the parking perhaps back up to the northeast corner, there is no need for a second bridge. That second bridge, I just don't understand the purpose of it. It's so close to the other bridge. And I think one bridge across the canal in that area is probably enough. But again, I just wanted to convey to you, we spent a lot of time talking about parking. We spent a lot of time getting to the point where some parking is allowed, but I think if that can be looked at, again, that would be important. The third thing, and some of this is probably heresy to some people here, but I just wanted to mention that we also spent a lot of time talking about the buildings. And as you know, the document only requires that the Hopkins house and the old barn be retained. And I look at that plan and my limited knowledge of the buildings, and we had a lot of conversation with Kat, and she said that in the video about her house. And I think she understood that, the buildings were going to need work. They were potential liability for the village, etc. So I guess I would encourage you to really think carefully about the importance of retaining all of those buildings. Those are, I think, a huge obligation and a huge potential liability and expense for the village. And I just did want to clarify that was a conversation we had that Kat was very understanding of, and which is why in the document we only allow for keeping the old barn and the Hopkins house. The others can obviously the main house can be torn down and converted to a nature center, public use center, that kind of thing. I believe his name was Eric, who read from the easement earlier, and so I wasn't going to read from it, but I'm glad he pointed out that section of the easement that talks about the uses, and in particular the preservation uses. I mean, that was a really central part of the easement that Kat wanted in there. You see that kind of language in other easements, but frankly, not really. I mean, we came back, and usually that stuff is all up front, and we came back and restated that later in the easement because of how important those uses were to Kat. So I think that language is really critical to pay attention to. Couple of other random things I wrote down while other people were talking. I think that there are some good examples locally. I think Debbie mentioned one in Sedalia, and I think she's speaking about the Lowell Ranch, which is actually located south of Castle Rock and is run by a nonprofit called CAF, Colorado Agricultural Foundation, whatever that stands for, run by a young woman named Brooke Fox, who grew up in Sedalia and used to run the Douglas County Open Space Program. And then up here in Boulder, we've got Long's Garden, which is a wonderful example of a property in the middle of Boulder that's is more of a working farm. You know, that's the Iris Garden up here, but they have a lot of community garden activities. And the Longs are actually a group where the Conservation Fund is working with now to preserve that property. And those are wonderful examples that you guys might want to take a look at. So again, whatever help I can be going forward, I'm happy to, and happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Sydney. Anybody have any questions for Sydney? All right, who's next on the Zoom call?
Harriet Lemaire.
I think I'm unmuted.
Yes, we can hear you.
I don't know if it's worth starting the video. Do people see people here or not? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, I'll speak without the video on. You know, I just want to, my name's Harriet Lemaire. I live at 16 Cherry Lane Drive in the Village. You know, I served on the Parks and Trails Committee when I first moved down to Cherry Hills with Clausina. We formed the Cherry Hills Land Preserve and formed the original Quincy Farm Visioning Committee. Worked with Kat, had the honor to be there when that video was made of Kat, which was really touching today. To Lucinda Green, to the village staff and the committee, and all of the committed volunteers, the family and friends who've shown their love for Kat and the property and the village by the numerous thoughtful comments today and over the past years of discussion about this property. You know, it's really heartening to hear so many of you speak out with such passion and dedication to this legacy property. Thank you. We all have the best intentions, and it's an honor to be part of this effort with all of you to write a plan that will serve as a framework to fulfill Kat's vision. As a villager, I'd like to comment on the draft plan. A lot of great work's gone into preparing this plan, and I think we all know that until someone puts something in front of you, like a draft plan, you don't really have a chance to understand the edges of what you feel is appropriate or inappropriate. So without this draft in front of us, I don't think we wouldn't be as far along. And this is a really, I think it's an incredibly helpful discussion. So with this property, I think the overall goal, as we've heard everyone say, should be to preserve what is there and not add new features. It's not needed. I truly believe that less is more. You know, and with that, I feel that there's been so much beautiful language said about, you know, people's vision for the property and what Kat wanted. But so I wanted to try to be concrete in some comments. And so I have some bulleted thoughts about the plan itself. Overall, I think that as a community in planning the framework for this property, that we should really support prioritization and protection of privacy. You know, the canal is busy, and we've seen it very busy during the pandemic, and we should well manage and limit some sort of, you know, limit to an open door policy from the property to the canal in a respectful and friendly manner. I don't have the answer to that, but I think that that should be thought about very carefully. I also think that the canal is a treasure, and to put parking, as Sydney said, right next to the canal is not what people would want either. So that needs to be thought through. Parking overall seems that it went beyond my memories, as Sydney said, of the easement. And back to less is more, I would reduce the parking significantly. I don't know all the numbers. I would also encourage the consideration of reducing the signage that's indicated in the plan. You know, these days you can do QR codes just with your phone. You can hand out little maps and guides to people so that you're not, quote unquote, sort of littering the property with too much signage. So I'd really encourage consideration of that. I think that new pavement and formal gardens and hardscaping walkways don't feel like they're in keeping with the spirit of the language in the easement. specifically any renovation of gardens, parking areas, walking paths, etc. Sharp edges that were shown in the plan don't feel appropriate. Edging materials, and formalized walkways, that just doesn't feel at all appropriate for an old farm. I think a fire pit is inappropriate. Water features, if water is being used, it should be used to the betterment of the farm and not as a feature. I don't think another bridge crossing the canal is appropriate at all. Additional water used for consumptive grassy lawn areas feels, again, inappropriate. The imagery of the overlook to the pond feels overbuilt and is smack in the middle of the pond, taking away from the, quote, preserved natural view. So I'm not sure that would even be appropriate. I'd be saddened to see the entry changed and be, quote, formalized. I don't think additional art features or a sculpture walk other than art that was cats feel appropriate for the property either, to the preservation of really what is there. Personally very supportive of live animals on the site and the local food movement efforts to, grow slow food and so forth there on the property that so many people beautifully articulated. Fully support water education that's low impact, but not a permanent change to the property that was shown in the plan. I fully support the management of the property, which isn't really addressed, but under a multi-year contract with a nonprofit organization that has this in its mission and it's in its passion. I think the land preserve or a separate nonprofit form for this purpose would work beautifully. The contract with such a nonprofit could be reviewed by the Parks, Trails, and Rec Committee with a recommendation on an annual basis. And then after trust and proof of success is carried forward, perhaps it could be less frequent. I personally support so many of the farm camp related programming ideas. I went to a summer farm camp that was way before its time that my uncle ran in Northern California that reminds me of this property, but it was 360 acres. So we have to be careful, but I really feel that that was always what everyone imagined would happen. So I'm fully supportive of that. These are activities that a nonprofit community organization can manage and carry out with community volunteers. There's so many people so passionate about this kind of thing, and I think it's hard for a city to carry that forward. So that was my comment on the management side of things. We all obviously have the best of intentions or we wouldn't be here with this together today. It's an honor to be part of the effort to write this final framework plan that'll serve as a guide to fulfill CAT's goals and aspirations for the future at Quincy Farm. Together, keeping together, working together, carrying out over perhaps a long period of time, as Sydney also so beautifully said, incrementally, we will honor CAT's legacy gift and realize her hopes and dreams while designing a framework for the plan, for the farm and for the city to manage this and carry out the wishes. So it's my honor to be able to speak today, and thanks to all of you that have so beautifully stewarded these conversations forward. And I'm sorry not to have been involved more throughout the process, and I hope it's not too late. So thank you.
Thank you, Harriet. Any comments?
I would like to make a comment. This is Becky Dennis. Can you hear me? Nope.
This is Becky Dennis. Can you hear me? It says Rebecca, but I'm mostly Becky. This is my first meeting, but I don't have any prepared statements. I would like to offer this as sort of a metaphor for how I see Quincy Farm now. My husband and I have lived for 40 years across the canal from the pond, and we love it. We love it here. A neighbor of Gordon's took a photograph a month or so ago of 10 or 12 white pelicans on the pond. There's no viewing platform, there's just a bench there. It's one of the most beautiful photographs, and maybe we can get it together sometime, Gordon. I think it was it Howard who took the photograph.
No, I don't think so. It's probably Walt.
Walt Stinson. But this is something, the way Quincy Farm is now, the simplicity of a bench at the pond. And I have seen a few white pelicans on the large pond on Kent property, and a couple of them, but never 10 or 12. They were all together. It's a beautiful photograph. And to me, that sort of kind of epitomizes what we're trying to conceive here. Thank you. Do we have anyone else on Zoom who would like to participate? Okay, I think this concludes the audience participation portion. Thank you all for sharing your input. We appreciate it very much. Know that we have listened and heard, and as drafts are, they're subject to revision, and certainly we consider spaces for improvement. We're grateful that you've come forward to speak up, because it isn't our project, it's the community's project. But as you have heard, you know we've got multiple viewpoints, and so we've got to find that right path between those multiple viewpoints to serve as many citizens in the future as possible. So we want to continue to work with each and every one of you to get your input. So I ask that you continue to provide feedback to the city in written form, so that we can continue to consider those positions as we move forward. We don't have an established timeline yet. That is something that we do want to try and address this afternoon. I'm mindful that we're over time, so I thank for the grace and flexibility of my fellow committee members who are sticking with this as we continue to work through the rest of the agenda. We have heard loud and clear that notice for some of you has been problematic, and we will do everything we can to help address that. I'm encouraged personally by what I heard, that we have, I think, a lot more congruence than we have discontinuity. And it may be that this first draft missed the mark in terms of a communications piece. Okay, so let's continue to work together in the spirit of that collaboration. And we will continue to hear your thoughts and comments. We've got a lot of work to do, and we've got to roll up our sleeves. So having said that, thank you very much again for your attention. Shall we move along to the next part of the agenda?
Sure, the next thing on the agenda would be the approval of minutes.
Okay, did you have an opportunity to review the minutes from, I think that was a Zoom meeting on March 26th, was it not?
Yes, it was.
Okay. Do I have any corrections or updates to those minutes?
Yeah, I'd like to ask a question. This is the one, about the middle of, excuse me, middle of page 6. Emily, it says ordinary black. That's the paragraph that begins with that. On page 6 of the minutes.
Yes.
Okay, I'm trying to understand what exactly, how this lays out exactly. What is it that, would you go through this and explain what this paragraph says this is going to, where it's going to go, where this path is going, whatever?
Are you asking the location of the gate that I'm referring to in this paragraph? Or the path to the pump house?
Well, it says, yeah, it has to do with that. Are you talking about the path, the pump house that's on the west side of the canal?
Yes, so the most helpful thing would actually be to pull up the site plan, if you'll give us a minute to do that. I'm gonna get the site plan by itself. That's gonna be easier. My God, are you kidding? Thanks, Laura. Oh, Lucinda, did Melinda get her certificate? Oh, okay.
Sorry about that. Yes, I did walk out and hand it to her.
Okay, so I'm gonna put this here, and give me just a second so that I can get it for the Zoom people too. Okay, so Gordon, the path that we're discussing in this paragraph is referring to the path in front of the pump house, so leading down to the pump house. Since right now people can't get near the pump house, they can't have any experience with it. And it is a really, excuse me, important building in terms of the history and in terms of the history of irrigation and how water is used on this property and has been used going back to the 30s. So the idea is to open up that split rail fence and allow for people to walk down, look at the front of the pump house, maybe have the old pump on display if that's a possibility, but allow them to see that historic building that there currently isn't any access
I guess I
to.
don't know where the split rail fence is, and when you say on both sides, I don't know what you're referring to.
Oh, it's really creating a path, having a split rail fence on both sides of a path that leads directly to the pump house.
And where does the path come from?
From the High Line.
So in the original plan, it just showed a
Oh,
fence
you need
going.
it. Oh, sorry. No, did you say that?
Oh, you're saying from the,
Yes, so it's from the Highline Trail. So the original plan just showed a split rail that actually cut that off so nobody could go. We wanted to kind of put a dead end down there, make sure we fenced it so people could get to the pump house, but not continue to walk around the pond, go to those private properties. But
So-
just kind of like a pull off, so you could go down there and then get back on the Highline
from the High Line
Trail.
From the High Line
proper.
Trail
Correct.
down to the pump house and back.
Yes.
Okay, I get it. I understand what you mean now. Thanks.
Any other comments on the minutes? Move to approve the minutes as written. Second?
I second.
It's been moved by Placina and seconded by Gordon to approve the minutes of the March 26th meeting. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed?
Well, I'm gonna ask Dino and Sally to vote by roll call since they're separate and we might not be able to hear them, just to get our ducks in a row.
Fair enough.
Okay, Dino is unmuted.
Yep.
Okay, and Sally? Oh, Sally, we
Sally's
can't.
muted.
Sally, we can't hear you. I'm gonna ask you to unmute yourself.
All right.
There we go.
I approve.
Thank you.
Okay. Next up, gotta turn the page over. Unfinished business, ongoing projects and budget. Emily?
Okay, so the budget so far for the year is attached as Exhibit A, and as the committee all knows, our only ongoing project for the year besides regular maintenance is completion of the master plan. So I did include an update about the east side of the farm in your memo. The city will begin maintenance of that side on July 1st of this year. And Jeff Roberts, our Parks Operations Supervisor, has met with Ms. Carlson about installing an east side gate to make that side, to restrict access to that side, provide a little bit more security, and to learn about specific maintenance needs. There won't be any public access on the east side of the farm until the master plan is approved by council, until appropriate safety and security measures that are in place. So we're quite a ways away from that. Are there any questions about anything in the budget or any of the east side updates?
I have a question about Exhibit B. Are we ready for that yet?
Sure.
Can you explain this? Under Exhibit B, under the first column, period, actual, the negative number, I guess it's a negative number of 41,000 something?
Yes, so that is actually a payment. I know it is showing very strangely, but that's the closeout payment from Arapahoe County to the city. It's a $41,000 payment, I think. And that is the last payment for our $187,000 grant for the irrigation that we were awarded a couple of years ago. So it's showing as negative this year because it was deposited this year and then we applied it to 2019 since that's when the spending was. But that is actually a $40,000 grant payment to the city.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other comments on the memorandum or the budget? Okay. Let's see, master plan, draft written plan. Emily, would you like to guide us through this?
Sure.
So we have a little organization to our thoughts and contributions.
Yeah, so I know that the committee, we've all heard a lot of feedback today. We'll get those minutes together to, so that the committee will be able to reference those. And I think we're all gonna need, some time to look at those comments and absorb them and synthesize them into this plan. So I think everybody that wants to see, oops, we have an echo. Okay. Nope. What did you just change? Can we switch it back?
I think we're okay.
Okay, we'll find out. Yes, okay. So thank you to everyone that came to speak or called in to speak, because we really do appreciate everyone's comments. So I will try to move quickly through this. So I really had 3 goals for the committee today. So let me make sure that we're all on the same page. One is to outline sort of our tentative next steps since we did cancel many meetings because of stay at home, and we're on a new timeline now. So starting to talk through that draft timeline and come up with our next steps. Another goal is to very tentatively talk amongst ourselves about the phasing for the site plan, because that will help Joel with cost estimating, whether we're going to do certain pieces all at the same time, or whether we'd be doing buildings individually. And then lastly, I had get through as many of our comments as possible, but I think we'll probably table that and at the next meeting, be able to go through everyone's comments, the committee's written comments together, because I know we're already quite over our time. So if the committee is on board with that plan, I think maybe first we can talk about a tentative timeline for next steps. So in your memo, oh, thank you, Laura. We have today's meeting and we're anticipating that we'll have another meeting later in June where we'll have the consultant with us for that meeting. So whether committee members are available on June 23rd or 30th, if people know today, or if you'd prefer, I can send out a poll. But really working through the drafts of the master plan through July with the goal of finalizing, with coming to a final plan at the end of July or maybe early August, to be able to share that with the Parks, Trails, and Recreation Commission at their August meeting. Colorado Open Lands Board meets in August as well. So being able to coordinate through that process and then bring the plan to council in September. So I'm looking for the committee's initial feedback. Is this, too crunched? Would you prefer to, extend it out? Does this seem appropriate? So I'll open it up for your comments.
Emily, this is Dino. So my suggestion would be to consider all of the feedback that was given today and have the committee, give the committee an opportunity to, to process it, synthesize it, and come up with some feedback. Maybe we can meet again and discuss the feedback before we meet with the consultant again. I think it would be premature just to meet with the consultant before the committee's had an opportunity to review the feedback and make appropriate suggestions.
That sounds right to me.
Any other comments?
I would agree with that also.
It sounds like a good idea, Sally.
Okay, so we'll plan on scheduling our next meeting sort of again like this, just without our consultant, and then having them at the following meeting. So
And
that's
would
what
there be, and I'm sorry, Emily, would there be any opportunity to maybe have maybe an email conversation or phone conversation, with Jerry and with some of the other speakers today? I had a couple of follow-on questions I didn't feel were, because of time constraints and just because of the number of speakers today, but I had some questions that I wanted to, or at least have an informal conversation with a few of the speakers. Would that be possible? Is there a way we could facilitate that?
You're certainly welcome to reach out to anyone who spoke today, certainly.
And I assume you would have contact information.
I believe so in most cases.
I have contact. These are all members. I have contact. I'm sorry.
I didn't hear that. Can you say that again?
I have contact information. If everyone doesn't have it, I do.
Okay. Thank you.
How quickly can we expect all these comments? What Jerry's are what I'm thinking of. Hopefully she'll send it in.
She has already emailed me her comments, so I'll be able, after this meeting today, to be able to send those out to you.
Okay, and then what's the expected turnaround? I'm thinking about the date we need to set. What's your time frame in terms of synthesizing all these comments and making them available in a new document for us?
By sometime next week. I have 2 other committee meetings at the end of this week. I apologize. I'm crunched, but probably early next week.
Yeah, no rush, no worries. I'm just looking, is June 3rd practical, I guess is the question, or June 23rd? Or should we move it to the 30th to give everyone an opportunity to have get the documents together, have whatever offline conversations we want to have in pursuit of finding out more information?
I think June 30th would probably be helpful. And I know I don't want to put words in Joel's mouth, but that might give you a chance to work a little bit more and for us to find out a little bit more about cost estimating. So I think another week would be helpful.
Yeah, that would be helpful.
So then to your question, I think what we would propose, if everyone's available, is the next meeting would be June 30th without design concepts. And the point will be to gather and summarize all the feedback from this information, gather the information that Joel has to share about budgeting on specific costs, and also get additional information so that individual committee members can follow up as need be. Is that correct?
I hope for the 30 June meeting that we will have already had that information to have reviewed and provide our own feedback, at that meeting, if it's possible. So perhaps that process, again, depending on the timeline, but it sounds to me that if we're looking for an August or September timeline, that only leaves us with just a couple of meetings to crystallize all of the feedback here and make the appropriate adjustments to the master plan if necessary.
It's my understanding, Dino, that our existing timeline that has previously been published on the website is not valid anymore, and that we're setting up a new timeline. Certainly, we've seen delays because of COVID, and I acknowledge that we need to keep working through the process, but I want to give everyone an opportunity to absorb and understand this new feedback. I do agree that the information will be to us before the 30th, but that we would come together as a group and be able to talk about it on the 30th.
Thank you, Lucinda.
Okay, so we have the next meeting on the 30th.
Yes.
Now, after that, I'm at a loss as to scheduling, so look for input.
This is Sally. I have a comment. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
I don't know about all of you, but I've made about a page of comments just gleaned from the speakers and all that was said today that is at least an outline of how to proceed with review of what we've done and what people really do want to address in addition to or to review again of what we've done. And so I think for myself, and I would encourage the other committee members, and you probably have done the same, I think this type of list based on what's happened today would be useful for the committee to make sure we don't forget to address things other than just in the minutes. So however you reacted to it and what you took away, I don't know if we could coalesce a few of our lists so we handle it, or make a specific time during our meeting as a committee to address these particular thoughts. I think that could be really important to not forgetting important details brought to us by the community and other individuals that have been aligned for a long time with us.
Would you like to write them down and include them in a packet? Is that how you'd like to present them so everybody can see? Everybody on the committee can have the same information. Is that the procedure you'd like to follow?
I don't know if it's a procedure just for me or for us to put it together just so we can review it or make sure we touch on it. It could be done in each of us make our own list and then address the issues as a group so they come up, en masse from us all at once. I don't know that they all need to be parsed out individually before that. I just want to make sure we address them so we don't forget about them, drop them. They range, they're just quite a big range. I don't know how anyone else feels about that, whether it's, security, changing parking, better communication, comments from people who have been involved with the plan for a long time. Even the pond information, for me, I might need another review of what Colorado Open Lands really will and won't allow with regard to the conservation easement, taking into account, for example, the comments regarding sort of keeping the pond view more simple than the current plan, just to consider that aspect for view lines and for activity and for building new structures. So it's something like that. I don't know that it needs to be called out in a formal written form, but I do believe as a committee that if we each brought in the things we thought were important that we took away from today, to make sure that we do discuss them and not forget about them, because there were so many actually.
Yeah, Sally, I agree with you.
So what format would you like to share those in? What would be best for everybody?
I think as a committee that we designate some specific time to, bring our own lists and go through them. I think we would cover them in a more efficient way, just as that group between us to make sure we get through them. I don't think any one person has to draw up the draft unless other people disagree. It may be an extra meeting. It may be part of a meeting that's already scheduled. I just want to make sure that we, since people made really specific and deep effort to come and join us, and that we have, as Harriet pointed out, the draft of the master plan also lets us see what we do know and what we don't know and what we need to add and what we need to take away. So to answer your question, I think we could sit down as a group and just go through the various topics. And I don't know if it needs to be more formal than that. The main topics that people thought were important today.
Well, I guess my question is, we certainly will do that. I mean, that's going to be part and parcel of the process. Should each committee, are you recommending that each committee member provide their thoughts and documentation to a packet, or do you want to just have us each write it down and share it just in a discussion format? I guess that's where I'm going.
What I was trying to say is I think the discussion format is probably sufficient, and out of that will come kind of a more master list among us of what we heard as really important details and questions people had and additions.
So there's a lot of overlap in the comments that we heard from different people. So one of the things that we could do is just create the master list ahead of time. In other words, what did we take away as the salient issues? And we can maybe get Emily and just have, number one is the pond, number two is the parking, that kind of thing.
We can do it that way. We can leave some room on the bottom to add something if we left it out as a group. That would be sufficient too.
Absolutely.
Why don't each of us just submit our own list of items that we need to address? And then someone else can synthesize it and make it into one long list rather than 5 or 6 or 7 separate lists.
And that's what I was trying to say by if we got together for a meeting. I think that would probably happen as a natural result of the meeting. It's just whether we begin with an outline of a list and add to it, or it's kind of up to what people believe would be efficient. I just want to make sure we do that, because I think a lot of good things were said today in terms of considerations.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think, so what I would recommend then is that we each send an email or list to Emily with, I guess, thoughts and detail and takeaways from this meeting as a way to inform our next discussion. And it would be helpful in order to organize that list, just kind of if you put them into maybe big picture bullet points of specific areas, so that then we can take each topic in turn. Does that make sense? And then that'll be part of the documentation that is publicly presented. It will be part of the documentation that we take up on June 30th. How's that sound?
I think it sounds okay. I don't know if we want to create a lot of extra work for Emily, or if we want to sit down as a group and kind of, as a group, go through our own list so that we hit the bullet points. That's more a committee idea of how to approach it most efficiently.
Emily is shaking her head. You can't see her shaking her head on Zoom. I think she's indicating it's not
it's fine.
The scope of her work.
Yeah, it's fine. If everybody on the committee wants to send me a bullet pointed list of, here are the topics that I heard, here are the things that here are my opinions, here are the things that I want to make sure that we don't miss. And like I said, I'll also have those minutes available too. So then you all will be able to go through those minutes too, and jot down your comments. So I think having everyone send me a list would be fine.
Emily, if you have a kind of format you want us to use, whether it's takeaways, whether it's questions remaining, unaddressed concerns, whatever, however you want to do it, it might help you see in an organized fashion what each of us think.
I will give that some more thought and email that to you guys once I've had a chance to digest a little bit. But even for now, you know, if you just send bullet points, that's just fine.
Okay, great.
All right, so that's June 30th. Then do we want to plan in this memorandum, it says our next regularly scheduled meeting would be July 21st. And discuss possible need for 2 July meetings, one for another review and one for committee approval of the plan. How do y'all feel? What's your tenor in terms of that timeline?
I just had a comment about, Emily, when do you need this list?
If our meeting is don't have a calendar.
When do you need our list of comments?
About a week in advance of that meeting. So give me just a second to pull my calendar up. I would ask you probably to send them by the 22nd, Monday the 22nd.
And I agree.
There is a lot to digest.
And Emily, so you're saying too that you have a lot of this in your minutes? A lot of the comments?
The minutes from this meeting.
The minutes from this meeting.
Yes.
Also, can I just note that because we streamed it on the website, that recording will be available in perpetuity for you guys to review.
Okay, so far, comments due back to Emily on June 22nd. Next meeting is June 30th. And the purpose will be to review the input from this meeting and continue to talk about our draft plan before this. So now we're saying June 30th would not include the consultant or would?
Would not.
Okay. All right, so then what are the next steps after that?
So then I think we're reaching consensus on June 30th was some of the concerns that we've heard. And then we would meet with the consultants and share those concerns. But I would think that might be the regularly scheduled July meeting. I don't know. And then they still would need to come back to us after having heard, our consensus, I think.
Well, so there are two options. We could have you present those to the consultant at that meeting, or I can send the consensus, and the minutes and everything else from the June 30th meeting to the consultant, work with them, make changes to the plan, have them get you all that for that July 21st meeting. So that might be a possibility. I think at this point, the draft timeline that's in here is probably going to be too tight. Just based on, the feedback we got today, based on the fact that, there are pieces of the plan we're not finished yet that, are forthcoming. So why don't we stick with the June 30th as the next meeting? I will go back and work with the consultant and find out when they're available, because that also will impact our timeline. And over email, we'll discuss, what the possible next schedule is out into July. I'll let you know when the consultant might be available. And then we'll have another discussion at that June 30th meeting about the longer timeline and how that'll work out with, Colorado Open Lands, with PTRC, with council, because there's a lot of steps remaining and there's a lot of moving pieces. So why don't we plan on June 30th as our next meeting, and then I'll bring some more information about the consultant's availability back.
I think it might, oh, sorry.
Sorry, Sal, go ahead.
Yeah, it's Sally. I think it could be useful for the consultant to see our coalesced comments before they actually meet with us. I think they'll give probably more informed answers in a more efficient way if we give them a chance to see that.
I agree. So tentatively, it would be June 30th, no consultant, July 21st with the consultant, depending on their schedule.
Yes.
And then after that, we're still a little in limbo, depending on what additional feedback we might get or what additional thoughts we might have. Everybody on board with that calendar? Yes.
Yes.
Nods don't work, Joel. Is that saying?
Yes.
Yes. All right. So we've got a plan for our next 2 meetings. All right. Any other comments on this, Emily, that you want to share or information we need to know?
Not on the schedule. If you're all hanging in there, if we can have a brief discussion about possible phasing of areas on the farm, I think that would help Joel with his cost estimating plans. So let me pull up the final site plan, since I think that's the easiest. It's easier to actually look at it. Oh, is it another window? It's another window. Okay. Oh, thank you. Laura's gonna fix it, so it's actually on Zoom. Thanks, Laura. So in the past, the committee had been discussing the nature center as sort of turning the garage into the nature center as the first priority, but it's been quite a while since we talked about what parts of the farm we might consider activating first. And sort of in a similar way, we haven't really talked about on the east side in particular, if we envision doing work on all of the east side buildings at the same time, or if we see, work targeting the big barn and its preservation first and sort of leaving the stable and baby barn to a later phase. So that's what I wanted to open up to the group was, what are you seeing as possible phasing? What are your priorities? And this isn't, to set it in stone at this meeting. It's really just to give us an idea as we're working through the phasing and cost estimates of how this might work. So I will open it up to the committee to find out what your priorities might be.
So Emily, I think things have changed a little bit based on all these comments. As far as, well, to a certain degree, we were going to approach, or I was going to start working on the cost estimating for the work on the structures on the east side. And I kind of lump in the pump house to that because the pump house is pretty simple. With this comment about the parking area and some thoughts about moving it up into the northeast corner, that changes a lot the site work piece of component of it. I can still work on gathering information and numbers and budgeting on the structures themselves. But let's say you do move it to the northeast corner, per se, you have that grading and drainage issue already that exists between the stables and the baby barn, where there were a lot of suggestions, well, that's where you put parking. Now, I'm not saying that's what's going to happen per se, but I think what I ought to do is just continue to work on cost estimating for the structures. And then once this master plan and site plan evolves based on the discussions today, then those numbers can be put into it. Like I say in that email, I'm still planning on meeting the roofing contractor tomorrow morning over there. That's simple. That doesn't impact where you put parking. Any of the work to the structures can be separate from the parking costs. Then we talked about looking at the garage next, if I'm correct, and doing that cost estimating and really leaving the main house and Hawkins house as the last piece of cost estimating for the structure, certainly. Because the west side has a lot less to do with the site work as opposed to the east side. So that's our approach that we discussed last week.
Thanks.
Does anybody have any concerns with that process or input or thoughts?
I think it would be important to get a cost estimation of the existing structures because those will not change. But as we talked about, I think it's going to be difficult to estimate this without having a clear direction as to what the site work and topography is going to look like.
I think, Sally, one thing that was brought up today was, and by Gordon in his comments prior to the meeting, was the designated uses of the various buildings. Will the garage still be the nature center, or will the main house? Will the main house keep standing, or will it be taken down and moved into something else? Is there a place on the farm for a caretaker? If there isn't a caretaker, is it some building we already have? And does that influence how we look at our cost estimating and the timeline on how each building is approached? Even Kat's comments about the things that could remain and then the oversight of Colorado Open Lands and the historic designation of the buildings that must stay and leave. Does that influence how we would approach it at this time?
Okay, so I think what I'm hearing is, Joel, we'll just have you keep moving forward with the individual, building estimates. And we'll have more information at the July 30th meeting for you to be able to go off of.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, so that phasing discussion and the schedule discussion were my main priorities. I'll let the committee decide if we want to just keep these collected comments that we have as our exhibit and move them to the next meeting and incorporate them into that discussion, or if you prefer to discuss some of those comments now. But we're already 3 hours in, so.
I'm open to either. We can keep going and run through these comments and maybe put on hold some of the ones that if we want to change or retract, we can do so. I'll leave it. What do y'all want to do?
I would suggest that we go back and look at our comments that were more substantive. And then maybe, that can be added as the list to Emily. And, for example, with the new information we have, we may say, well, the comment I made over there, still not interested in it anymore. So let's incorporate our comments that were included in the packet today into what we give to Emily and not try to deal with it all today. I think, I want to go back and look at my notes from today's meeting and do some careful thinking. So I think we won't make much progress today if we try to do it.
Any thoughts on Christina's idea?
I think that would be really helpful if you just incorporate your thoughts from today with your previous comments, resubmit those to me, and then we'll have a better, a more thoughtful set of comments going into the next meeting if some were affected by what we heard today. So I think that's a really good approach.
Okay, everybody okay with that? We're all good with that approach? Seeing nods.
Yeah.
Good, okay, thank you.
All right, sorry, I have too many pieces of paper here. Let me find my agenda again.
All right, water rights update.
I don't need to say too much about this. I was just asked to provide an update about water rights at Quincy Farm, so nothing has substantially changed. But I've included in your packet a summary of the water rights that exist for the farm, and the most recent letter that we've received from Denver Water about Highline Canal water. So they are starting to run the Highline Canal. I am not sure it has actually made it. It has made it to Quincy Farm. I'm seeing nods from Jeff and Jay. So we'll be using that water to irrigate, and we would keep the committee updated with other communications we get from Denver Water, but I don't have a specific update about rights changing or anything else. Denver Water's indicated that they'll be approaching property owners to negotiate water rights, but that has not happened in our case, so we will be patient and wait for them to approach us. I'm happy to answer any questions that the committee has.
I can give a little update as what's going on with the neighbors, if you'd like, rather than relay it to the committee member reports. First of all, the water reached our gate, which is our head gate, which is just south of the pond, yesterday morning. It took at least until Saturday, from Saturday to get there. That's how much seepage and how slowly it moves down the canal. That's one thing. The second thing is that I'm not sure it's covered here, but what's covered in the memorandum here that Emily wrote was that we cannot store the water that comes down the canal any longer than 72 hours. So it's the same regulation that they've, I guess, adopted for rain barrels in this state up until now. It doesn't affect the Stinsons or us. It does affect probably the Quincy Farm and certainly the Shermers. The Shermers are now in negotiation as a test case, it sounds to me like, with Denver Water as a result, as the issue is, how can Denver Water provide pond water to them? Because they do have a pond, and it's a different situation than the two of us that don't have ponds. The negotiation now over is who has to pay for a separate meter and for the piping to get the water to the pond. And the reason for the separate meter would be that Shermer's trying to negotiate, and the Denver Water is receptive to have that water billed to him at a lower rate than for just regular drinking water. So that's what's going on there. The three neighbors, the three of us have hired a water attorney as well as an engineer. The water attorney is for the purpose of negotiating with Denver Water. The engineer has been retained in order to help establish the value of the water rights that we've got. And in case we either have to sell them or negotiate a deal with Denver Water, we need to know what they're worth. And so that's going on. Maybe there's an opportunity there again for the city to participate in that, or maybe not as the city chooses. But we're moving ahead with it. That's it.
Jay, did you want to address our conversation with the mayor about his conversations with Denver Water and what he shared in that meeting?
Yes, so we had spoken with Mayor Stewart last week, Chair Green, Emily Black, and I. And we're really, Denver Water has been in contact with the mayor. But again, I think, as Mr. Rockefeller said, they are not wanting to negotiate yet with others as they work through this test case to see how these agreements may go. They have worked out all the agreements to Hampton Avenue. Again, every single user of the Highline Canal had different agreements, different water rights, ditch rights. So there's no apples to apples anywhere. So we will be waiting for Denver Water to approach us after they are comfortable to do that. We do have money in the budget for the same type of engineering and attorney's costs when that does come along, so we can make sure that we get the best value for our residents as we can out of that. So we will continue to work with that. We do have some of those rights on the pond that are 72 hours, so we have to try to figure out, we can put well water in there and use it at whatever rate we would like, but once we put the canal water in, we have to be able to say, well, we know we use that much in 72 hours, so we're still good. They're not gonna make us meter that or any of those things, so we will continue to monitor that and see what comes up.
Yeah, I think there's been one other unfortunate ruling, I would call it, from the state water engineer. And that is that he has ruled that the use of canal water for the purpose of maintaining the tree canopy is not an appropriate use. So the idea of these water rights going away or being contributed back or somehow negotiated or even sold back to Denver Water with the idea that the water that we don't use or would not have used and promise not to use, and not have it available, cannot be used to nourish the canal, meaning the canopy over the canal. So that's big negative as far as I'm concerned. What we have done instead of our house is we have hooked up our sprinkler system to water the trees on our side of the canal. And I'd like to see that program if we could somehow encourage everybody to do that, it might help. But right now, the tree canopy is kind of going to be left on the outside.
We lost some folks. Any other updates on the water rates? Any new business? Should we pause here for the two members to come back?
You don't have to, you still have a quorum. There's no new business, so we would just move on to report.
The chair has no further report. Gordon, do you have anything else? Cosina? Staff?
No, and I would, yeah.
Oh,
we can ask
excuse me, I'm
Sally and
sorry,
Gina.
Sally.
That's okay.
Sally, do you have a report?
No, I don't. Thank you.
Dina?
I do not.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry now, staff?
I have no further reports.
Okay, therefore I will make a motion to adjourn. I want to thank everyone for their dedication and attendance and persistence. Together we're going to make this work. So I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, we are hereby adjourned. Thank you.